pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming. And as a treat, my sixth grader is calling me. Mr. Healy, can you tell me why this is happening? Okay. So can I have a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? I'll make a second. Okay. All in favor? And can tell me if Cody online?
Yep, I'm in favor.
You are wonderful. Thank you. 7-0. Ms. Kowalski, I believe you'll be joining us shortly. All right, next up, we are going to have some wonderful student recognitions. And so can I please have Mr. Georgiou come join us? Is he online?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Wait, can you hear me? Here we go. Good evening, Chair Stowe, Dr. Jones, Greenwich Board of Education members, and the Greenwich community that has joined us both in person and virtual. It is my honor today to recognize our student athletes that earned all state honors from the Connecticut High School Coaches Association in their respected sports. As I call your name, please stand and remain standing for recognition if you're in attendance. For cross country, we have Esme Daplin. For field hockey, Isabella Latuada, Justine Liguri, Clara Muffelman. For football, we have Jake Kiernan. Girls swimming, we have Peyton Foster, Michelle Weisler, Katarina Lee, Senna Boskirk, Angie Bingle, Isabella Malco, and Sydney G. Boys golf, we have Charles Schroy. Boys soccer, Isaac Duminy and Jake Hugh Jones. And for girls volleyball, Adele Sachu and Liana Sarkissian. Liana was also awarded Gatorade Connecticut Volleyball Player of the Year. For the seniors that we recognize tonight, we thank you all for your contributions to the Greenwich High School athletic program and wish you success in your future endeavors. As for the returning underclassmen, we are looking forward to next fall and seeing you build on your success. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's so nice to be back and seeing so many of you in person and virtually. Congratulations. Next up, we have Scholastic Writing Award recipients. Ms. Barry.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy and proud to announce this year's Scholastic Arts and Writing Awards. This is the nation's longest running, most prestigious recognition program for creative teens. Notable alumni include Andy Warhol, Truman Capote, Sylvia Plath, to name a few. Not bad company. These awards are presented by the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers, who have, for the past century, identified promising writers and helped encourage these writers to pursue their passions. I will read the names. If you are in attendance, please stand. I will also, these will be posted to our English department website tomorrow, so you can see all the names and the fabulous titles in full. As I think I mentioned, we have a record number of winners this year, including Annabelle Zhao, whose science fiction and fantasy won honorable mention. Ashley Melkin, whose several entries won gold keys, silver keys, honorable mention in flash fiction, poetry, and short story. Aubrey Niederhofer, whose personal essay and memoirs won honorable mention. B. Healy, whose short story won honorable mention. Benjamin Webster, whose critical essay won honorable mention. Chloe Henske, honorable mention for poetry. Christina Zhang, poetry honorable mention. Christine Song, personal essay and memoir, honorable mention. Elliot Malone, short stories, Silver Key. Francesca Latufo, Silver Key for personal essay and memoir. Hannah Ginsty, personal essay and memoir, Gold Key. Henry Cullen, honorable mention in the humor category. Jessica Ruggiero, honorable mention for poetry. Joaquim Gastelou, honorable mention for poetry. Maggie Miklosh, Silver Key for flash fiction. Olivia Nguyen, honorable mention for poetry. Sarah Wick, honorable mention for poetry. Shreya Prahu, honorable mention for personal essay and memoir. Sophie Genkalov, honorable mention for poetry. Thomas Song, honorable mention for poetry. Yanu Kook, honorable mention for poetry. And Ziyi Yan, Gold Key, Silver Keys, and honorable mention for plenty of beautiful poems. Thanks to the strong teachers and families who supported these fine students, and congratulations to you talented and dedicated writers.
That's great. And I love that I know some of the names on that list. So thank you so much for coming and for joining us online. Next up, can I please have our GHS student government representatives?
Good evening, Chair Stone, Chair Stowe, Dr. Jones, members of the board, and meeting attendees. I'm Javi Serra, Senior Class President at Greenwich High School. Last month, I broke the news about SRO. For decades, standing room only brought laughs, love, and linkage amongst Greenwich High School seniors in each graduating class. So understandably, many in our community are disappointed that there will be no SRO this year. I have heard from several teachers, older friends, and community members about how much SRO meant to them, their parents, and even grandparents. We too are disappointed that SRO won't continue this year, but it's important to remember that this tradition, at its core, was cherished by so many in our community because it brought together hundreds of classmates to celebrate 4 great years at GHS. So while we might not be gathering on a stage this year, we are continuing the longstanding GHS tradition of uniting the senior class. We are currently planning a senior event for early June where seniors will gather at GHS, either in the Student Center or at the stadium. When most seniors are out on internship and begin to feel nostalgic about their time at GHS, we are going to get together one last time before the graduation festivities begin. Speaking of graduation, I'm extremely grateful that Dr. Jones and the board will consider planning graduation for Thursday, June 23rd, and we can't wait to have it in our new and improved Cardinal Stadium. The class presidents have all been busy as of late. Mahir Shah is planning a Krispy Kreme fundraiser for the freshman class in April. Ishi Hassett is organizing a spring-themed Candygrams prior to April break for the sophomore class. Isabella Gega is running a cookie dough and pastry fundraiser right now, and I, alongside my peers, am going to be washing cars at Old Greenwich School Sunday, April 3rd, and we're also putting together a dodgeball tournament for April 25th for the senior class. Lastly, I have some exciting news regarding student government. Kwame will go into more detail, but the leadership structure for student government, namely our executive committee, will look different next year to encourage the most qualified candidates to run and to more broadly represent the entire student body. That being said, next year's senior class president will not accompany the student body president to speak at these Board of Education meetings like I do. Instead, this second slot will be for the new position, our student body vice president. I hope it had nothing to do with my speeches, but I am thrilled to see what our next group of student leaders can accomplish in this new and improved system. As always, thank you for this opportunity and for your time here tonight. I look forward to speaking with you all in a month's time.
Good evening, Chair Stowe, Dr. Jones, board members, and meeting attendees. I'm Kwame Boateng, Student Body President of Greenwich High School. As Javi mentioned previously, the GHS student government will look different next year. Thanks to our outstanding student government advisor, Mr. Silkman, and student activities director, Mrs. Foster, we now have a solid foundation for the future leadership structure. There will no longer be vice presidents of special events, community service, public relations, and student concerns, which now make up the Executive Committee of Student Government with myself, Javi, and the other class presidents. Instead, the Executive Committee will be composed of a student body president and a student body vice president, as well as class presidents and class vice presidents. In each class committee, there will be 2 class senators to replace the current class secretaries and treasurers. Additionally, new student government committee chairs will be responsible for organizing and executing school-wide events and initiatives that the VPs this year would typically pursue. Personally, I am most excited about a new mock debate that will take place between the candidates running for student body president. A moderated debate with questions from the GHS students will allow leaders to demonstrate their abilities to clearly communicate ideas and convey their policy priorities. Although it will look significantly different from past years, the new student government structure gives class vice presidents a greater involvement in the executive committee and grants homeroom representatives the freedom to be more connected with their constituency by serving as committee chairs. Just like our replacement for SRO, we believe that innovating within the school tradition is crucial to preserving community values as they evolve over time. The new structure for student government best reflects a competitive yet clean campaign environment for future DHS leaders and innovators. As we look toward the final stretch of the school year, I'm pleased to report that the Student Center has finally returned to its old vibrant self. As of Monday, the Student Center has been rearranged to 3 sections filled with huge tables that seat 12 students. As the spring breeze begins to blow through the classrooms and glass corridor, more and more students congregate and connect in the Student Center. In stark contrast to the beginning of this year, seeing many GHS students bonding with one another before, after, and in between classes gives me hope that normalcy is just around the corner. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thank you, Kwame. I like that, innovating within the school traditions. That's a good line. Thank you. Up next, can we have Lil? Is she online from GA? Oh, she's right here. I can't, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Well, this is outstanding. I actually can see what everybody looks like. Welcome. All right. Okay, good evening, Chair Stowe, Dr. Jones, board members, teachers, parents, students, and the entire Greenwich community. I'm Lillian Perrone, president of the Greenwich Education Association. First, I'd like to say congratulations to our fall state student athletes, also Miss Berry, and our scholastic writing recipients. I would like to personally thank Mr. Kelly for inviting GEA to participate in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. It was a wonderful and touching experience to see our GPS community lined up along our streets, our Greenwich Avenue, with excitement and smile on their faces, and we could actually see their faces, greeting us all with waves and thank yous. Thank you to Mr. Costello, for driving our truck. Thank you for Dr. Jones for hopping on and riding in our flatbed. And thank you for Mr. Georgiou, who was there earlier, for also joining us with his family for the ride. Thank you to our board members, Chairman Stowe, Laura Costin, Mr. Kelly, Sean O'Keefe, for having the courage and faith to walk in front of our truck. I didn't tell you, but it was Chuck's first time driving the truck. And he did tell me that he did practice the day before going 5 miles an hour. He did make one short stop and almost threw me off, but it's okay. So now to our agenda items. Thank you for moving our graduation date to June 23rd. GEA is asking you to vote and approve the 24th, 27th, and 28th as early release days so staff may clean up and close. This has also been another hard year for all of us, some even harder. Obstacles to overcome, like my friends at North Mianus and Central Middle School. Let's not forget our students, families, and all have experienced hardships, both physically and mentally. Yes, we have all come together to do great things. to overcome obstacles, to learn new ways to teach, new ways to learn, new ways to be resilient and get up and do what we need to get us all back in school with keeping everyone safe and now with our masks off. But please, let us not be too compliant, for we have much work still to do. We have all stepped up to the plate. GEA is now asking the BET to step up to the plate, do what is right for our public schools, for our children, teachers, and all staff. Please approve our superintendent's budget. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Before I go into community comments, I should let the students know if they want to go and not stay for our meeting. They are more than welcome. I know you probably all have homework and you have tomorrow off, so go enjoy. Thanks for coming.
You are going to miss the exciting presentation on the math textbook, though, if you want to stay.
I'm sorry, and I cut off Mimi, but whatever. I like how the GHS guys are staying. Our student government, they stay through and through. Look at that. Okay, next up, PTA Council, Mimi Duff.
My moment in the sun. All right. Good evening, Dr. Jones, Chair Stowe, and other members of the Board of Education. I'm Mimi Duff, President of PTA Council, representing the 15 school PTAs and the families of all their members. I want to start by acknowledging that this is Board of Education Appreciation Month. Thank you. We appreciate you. Next, I want to reiterate the full support of our PTAC board to approve the Board of Ed proposed capital and operating budgets. I will be speaking at Monday's BET meeting to voice our support. Specifically, we want to make sure the town moves forward with architectural and engineering planning for Central, Old Greenwich, and Julian Curtis. The starvation diet that our public school system has been on is no longer working, and we don't want to be put in emergency situations year after year due to ceiling collapses, shifting walls, or other unforeseen issues. It is so disruptive to our students, staff, and learning process. I will add that we were very dismayed to see that the BET initially did not offer a remote option for their Monday public comment meeting. When pressed, they added a listen-only Zoom meeting, meaning that those that can't be there in person can't add to the conversation. These are elected officials, and this is meant to be a public comment meeting. I really, really hope that all those that have shown up to voice strong opinions about the need for public comment at these Board of Ed meetings show up there in person and at least voice concerns about possibly silencing our taxpayers, something that we would never want to do. We are grateful that the Board of Ed remains accessible and documents are published in advance so we can have a more meaningful conversation with as many attendees as possible. PTAC would also like to show support for the local adoption of policy 5145.44 regarding Title IX, which failed in January 2022 by this Board of Education. This policy is titled Policy Regarding Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, Prohibition of Sex Discrimination and Sexual Harassment. We were dismayed and extremely disappointed by the past BOE vote, which leaves Greenwich out of compliance and could also leave them legally liable. Next, in my role as PTAC president, I end up talking to a lot of parents. I'm hearing that the current high school last day of school as June 28th is causing a lot of problems for students that have committed to summer work, enrichment, and volunteer programs, many of which had application deadlines far in the past, and where the students have made commitments. We hope that the district can reach a reasonable solution or resolution to accommodate these students. Next, a marketing plug for the upcoming PTAC happenings. We're always looking for dedicated, enthusiastic volunteers, and our nominating committee is hosting a meeting at 8 p.m. on March 31st to review openings. Please show up. The details should be in the newsletters or email me at president@greenwichptac.org or mimiduff@hotmail.com, old school. We also have a public session on April 1st where we'll have a speaker from Waste Free Greenwich, organized in part by our Green Schools Committee. Check the newsletters for details on that. Finally, PTAC continues to advocate for transparency and accountability within the school district. Recently, it's come to our attention that not all school committee meetings have the best information share and/or access to meeting documents like agendas and minutes. We would be grateful if you can devote some attention to seeing that this is improved, and we're happy to provide more details. As always, we thank you for your time, commitment, and service toward the betterment of our schools and student educational experiences. We at PTAC stand ready to assist in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. We now turn to our community comments, and as always, agenda items and non-agenda items, and 3 minutes each. First up is Jackie Homan, and then after that, Roger Rosendahl.
Good evening, Dr. Jones and Board of Education members. I have some questions about new policies that I hope you can help address tonight. Firstly, when was the policy approved that says COVID propaganda messaging should stay in place inside the schools after the mask mandate ended? I know for a fact that it's propaganda because I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Public Health, Dr. Juthani. I asked for scientific proof that masks were protective against COVID, that the vaccine stops transmission, and that boosting was safe and effective. You know what? There were no files or information responsive to my request. No information to show that masks work, just like I've been saying. So how hard would it be to remove the free mask stand in the school entryways in light of this new information that seems to confirm that masks don't work? How hard would it be to remove the propaganda floor mats? At least at Eastern, they're just sitting on top of the old ones. Why do you have to wait until at least the summer to purchase new mats? Isn't that exactly what the ESSER money was supposed to be about? And speaking about the ESSER money, I'd like to understand which policy allows you to turn our school into a wraparound clinic that would potentially be offering mental health services to children during the day. I've previously voiced my concerns over how the plan sounds like it would replicate the work of social services agencies inside our schools. Why is there such a strong push to deliver mental health services inside schools without parental support and parental supervision? Will counseling be provided in these clinics? And if so, what specific kinds of counseling do you anticipate providing? Will medications be recommended and/or distributed in the clinics? Will parents be made aware when their child visits a clinic, and will they be informed about the purpose of the visit? We've recently seen stories in the national press about schools secretly providing services to help affirm gender changes without the knowledge of parents. In extreme cases, parents have blamed their child's suicide on this kind of gender counseling. So I'd like to understand if you envision providing gender counseling through the clinic described in your ESSER application. The last thing I'm curious about is if you'll be implementing a new policy to address the enhanced risk for cardiac-related events in athletics and in gym due to vaccination. We've seen many stories of athletes who have suddenly collapsed and died due to cardiac events, including a 10-year-old Staten Island boy in gym class just yesterday. Former NFL player John Stockton is the latest to speak out, joining others who have raised concerns about the hundreds of vaccine-related cardiac events and deaths that have occurred, sometimes mid-game. Will you be adding a new policy to address this potential risk? Or perhaps requiring EKGs for participation in gym and sports, as some pediatric offices have started to recommend? Thank you for clarifying answers to my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Homan. Next up, Roger Rosendahl, followed by Kara Philbin.
Good evening. My name is Roger Rosendahl. I'm a 25-year resident of Greenwich. I have a couple points to make on the governance policy, and I'll be brief. First, I've spoken previously and mentioned the need for transparency, accuracy, and accountability, including statements made in public meetings like this one that were false and never corrected. I think those statements need to be corrected. And I think that if someone makes a statement that is knowingly false, there should be accountability. Second point, the policy governance committee of the board may wish to look into the potential conflict of interest between union financing of candidates for election with whom the union later negotiates for its own benefit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, Kara Philbin, followed by Megan Galetta.
Hi, yes. I'm Kara Philbin. I'm speaking as a parent this evening. I don't have a prepared speech, but I do have concerns regarding transparency, in particular with the ARPA 3, ARP ESSER 3 funding. I've attended Board of Ed meetings, RTM meetings, BET meetings, and I'm hearing the same question asked: how is this money being spent? More specifically, I was told, we were told that the money would be on the finance documents through the board. I've looked carefully through those. In particular, I'm looking for ruler training. I'm unable to find any budget items linked to ruler training. Ruler training is a transformative SEL program that is being brought by Mark Breckett out of the Yale Social Emotional Intelligence program. Mark Breckett and his boss are on the board of CASEL. CASEL is being promoted through the ARP ESSER 3 funding. According to CASEL, it's a transformative SEL that it represents, it's a transformative SEL that researchers and practitioners can use if they seek to effectively address issues such as power privilege, prejudice, discrimination, social justice, empowerment, and self-determination. The ruler training was, our staff was trained in that in June. That program is currently being piloted at Eastern Middle School. As a parent of 4 children in the Greenwich Public Schools, I want transparency. I would like to know if you will be pushing out ruler training, which will embed this transformative SEL into all of the core academics, as is being done in Eastern Middle School. I'd like to know by the end of the evening which schools, which powered to make choices about their kids' education, to pursue alternate opportunities, or to decide to continue on with the Greenwich Public Schools.
30 seconds.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kara Philbin. Next up, Megan Galetta, followed by Francis Nobe.
Hi, good evening. I'm speaking tonight regarding concerns with the lack of transparency with the ESSER funding and the allocation going forward. While we took stimulus money from the government, which required our children to mask up, a campaign that was initiated from 2 weeks to slow the spread, which was carried out for 2 years to change society. During that time, GPS moved swiftly to implement new SEL-based programs, Diversity Week and the No Hate Tour, a half-day program, just to name a couple. These programs have taken up critical learning hours with an objective to impart social justice and racially slanted messages to students at the high school level. At the middle school, programs based on ruler methodologies are being piloted. With so much learning lost during COVID and virtual school, our students are way behind. One would think the emphasis of the district would be specifically on academics and enrichment. While the buildings in the district are literally falling apart and students are sitting in the classrooms without air conditioning, we are appropriating more budget money to fund SEL. This seems off base and out of touch. Parents and taxpayers in the town of Greenwich would like more transparency and would like to understand how the ESSER 3 funding will be appropriated. Just on a personal anecdote, I have 2 older children, one age 22 and the other age 24, who both came through the GPS schools. When I tell them the types of programs, they're very involved in their brothers, with their brothers who are in the high school. And when I tell them the types of programs that are being offered now versus when they were at GPS, they're in shock. They just cannot believe the narrative over the social justice, racially driven, and SEL curriculum, and feel that the curriculum overall has gotten tremendously watered down. It makes them sad, and they really communicate to their brothers how they've seen just an overall decline. So I think that's just an interesting thing, since I have such a variety of ages of children, and it's interesting that they would even see such a decline. We can do better, and we must. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Next up, Frances Nobe, followed by Jamie Downs.
Hi, this is Frances Winobe, mom of 3 GPS kids. As we gather today in this place of learning to develop policy for learning, let's remind ourselves of childhood wonder, curiosity, and joyfulness. Tonight's selection is one of my all-time favorites, a book about stars. Presenting Usha and the Big Digger by Amita Jagannath Knight. Arti said, "I just found the Big Dipper." "What's a dipper?" asked Usha. "Show me." "It's a big spoon," said Arti. "See that box of 4 stars? Connect the dots to make the scoop. The other 3 stars make the handle." "Ooh, I see the scoop," shouted Usha. "Look out, stars, it's the Big Digger. That tree on the right points to the driver. Beep, beep." "No way," said Arti. "The tree is on the left. It points to the dipper's handle. Can't you tell your left from your right?" Said Gloria. "I see the big kite." "What?" cried Usha and Arti. "The top 4 stars are the kite and the bottom 3 stars are the tail," said Gloria. "Why can't anyone see my Big Dipper?" Usha moaned. "Because it's really the Big Dipper," Arti groaned. "Don't you like my kite?" asked Gloria. "Lie here and look up. It's a big kite," said Arti. "Now turn that way," said Usha. All 3 girls scooched around. "It's a Big Dipper," said Gloria. They scooched again. Arti and Gloria gasped, "And there's the Big Digger." In Europe, the Big Dipper is a wagon, saucepan, plow, or bear. In North Africa, a camel. In India, the 7 sages. As you leave tonight's meeting, you will see the 7 bright stars of the Big Dipper high in the northern sky like a large lacrosse stick. And much later, about 90 minutes before sunrise, Saturn, Mars, and Venus will form a wide isosceles triangle low in the east-southeast. Remember tonight the children, the wonder, the joy of learning. Special thanks to Greenwich High School astronomy teacher Richard Baxley and Cosmic Rick of the Bowman Observatory at Julian Curtis Elementary School for verifying my star signs. Have a great meeting, and thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Frances. Next up, Jamie Downs, followed by Julie Farinas.
Good evening. To begin, I'd like to thank the board for unanimously voting to make masks optional for all GPS students last month. We've yet to fully realize the cognitive and social emotional ramifications of masking children, especially our youngest learners, and I trust you will strive to maintain a holistic view of well-being as you consider policies going forward. But I'm not here tonight to talk about masks. I'm here to talk about technology. Marianne Wolf, the director for the Center of Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at UCLA, wrote an article for The Guardian entitled "Screen-Based Online Learning Will Change Kids' Brains. Are we ready for that?" In the article, she discusses how the process of learning to read literally changes our brains and highlights that it's not just what we read or how we read that impacts these changes, but also on what we read, referencing print, e-readers, phones, laptops, etc. She writes, "The digital elephant in every classroom and home is whether our youth will develop full literacy if learning largely on skim-encouraging screens." Neuroimaging research by Raymond Mars and others illuminate how reading deeply activates areas typically used for feeling or even movement in our brains. However, when we skim, Wolf says, we literally physiologically don't have time to think or feel. What is lost in between the lines, details in the plot, the beauty of the author's language, immersion into others' perspectives. The consequences of these losses cascade from decreasing empathy and critical analysis to susceptibility to fake news and demagoguery. We would be wise to consider the voices of researchers and educators like Marianne Wolf if we are to avoid falling victim to ineffective educational fads. Let us not be so enamored with the latest shiny gadgets that we neglect to use time-tested strategies and resources to cultivate literacy and numeracy skills. As we consider the role technology plays in a GPS education, as well as parental and pupil rights within this system, you might consider investigating some of the following questions parents have been asking. Are there district screen time guidelines? Does anyone monitor usage? Can parents access screen time statistics? Who reviews and approves digital curriculum? How does the district filter out inappropriate content? Who determines which sites are permitted and which ones are prohibited? How do they make these decisions? How are students prevented from navigating to unapproved sites during school? Who has access to student data? What data is shared and with whom? What research was used to support the integration of technology in the elementary grades? And what data is the district
30
using
seconds.
to analyze its impact on learning? Do parents know they have the right to opt out of technology? How are teachers supported in providing alternative programming for students who opt out? If a student would prefer a hard copy of a digital resource, how are they supported in obtaining one? Are kids reading entire novels online? What is the ratio of digital to print reading in elementary, middle, and high schools? Admittedly, these questions are complex, and I'm sure the answers are constantly evolving, but if we are committed to maximizing instructional time, protecting student privacy, and shielding them from inappropriate
Time.
content, we
Thank
should
you.
have the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Downs. Next up, Julie Farinas, and I see her online.
Good evening, Chairwoman Stowe, Dr. Jones, members of the Board of Education, Cabinet, PTA, and community. My name is Julie Ferniers, and I'm the Executive Director of the Greenwich Alliance for Education. The Alliance is the only nonprofit in Greenwich 100% focused on our public school students, teachers, families, and alumni. The Greenwich Alliance Avid Success Initiative focused on a variety of in-class good money habits, workshops, and programming with 9th through 12th graders this month. Our partners Members Credit Union held a financial reality fair, which asked students to make a number of thoughtful financial decisions based on the job, debt, and other financial factors they were assigned while playing this game. Definitely a fun way to learn and think about future financial choices. Also with our partner, all Avid students at Greenwich High School are encouraged to set up an Educate and Prosper college savings account at Members Credit Union to save money for college. The Greenwich Alliance will match 25 cents up on the dollar, up to $2,000 by graduation. Students doing the saving and work, and we give them $500. Donors are welcome to help us with supporting these matches. Avid Success is focused on helping Avid students learn about the pillars of financial independence: earning, saving, spending wisely, and investing. The Alliance continues to urge the district to focus on Avid with an administrative position dedicated to the nearly 200 Avid students and all Title I programs. Tuning into Music, our free instrumental music program for students in 4th through 12th grade, is listed to receive ARP funding from the town of Greenwich. With this funding, we plan to offer private lessons to all enrolled students and possibly plan a summer music program to reduce learning loss. Please encourage BET and RTM members to support the recommendations of the Art Review Committee. The Alliance is in full support of the budget and asks the BET and the RTM to vote for it as presented. It is very discouraging for me on a personal level, after 20+ years of advocating for our schools, that our buildings are crumbling and that we continue to push the can down the road for our children to take care of them in the future. We expect our school leaders to provide an exemplary educational experience for our students, yet
30 seconds.
on the basic structures for them to get the job done. This is entirely unacceptable. Thank you for your time and allowing the Alliance to speak. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Julie. And that actually concludes our community comments. We are now going to turn to monthly reports, but before we go into the super's report, I just wanted to say how nice it is to be at a different school. It's been a long time. We've sort of turned to Central for a while, and what I missed about being on the board pre-COVID was that we would visit different towns and different towns, different schools. It felt like different towns sometimes because we'd go to dinner before and you'd get to know that the Caucuswood, that neighborhood. So it was actually really quite lovely. But the disadvantage is, of course, the equipment is not as movable. And so I do like the hybrid situation. But this is all leading up to how special it is to be here with Mr. Schmidt, because he, of course, is retiring. And so I just wanted to give him a little bit of standing ovation before he goes. Sorry, I had to do that. All right, with that, can we please turn to Dr. Jones on the superintendent's report?
Sure, I just have a couple of items tonight. I know the students referenced to getting the GHS cafeteria back open, and we had let the principals know a couple of weeks ago. It would take us a few weeks. Actually, I think this was one of our first that opened, and it really just depended on which buildings were using their current cafeterias versus using their gyms. Some of them were using their gyms for cafeterias because they just have small spaces. As of today, we have, I believe, by the end of the week, we'll have one more. And that's North Miamis, which was the most challenging just because the amount of stuff in storage. But just thanks to our facilities team, they've worked overtime on the weekends to make this happen for all of our schools, and we're just very grateful. Also, just congratulations, CMS and WMS both have their productions coming up. So exciting to be back in person and really on stage again. The principal process, we have 3 openings, as you're all aware, so that's full steam ahead. We conducted a survey where we got input from teachers, we got input from the community, from the families on what they're looking for. There are actually traits where they went in and then they rated what was most important, what's least important, and what they're looking for in their next principal. And then on the 30th, all 3 of those buildings have senior leadership going out and actually conducting on site. They'll do a staff meeting after school, and then they have a parent meeting at 6 o'clock. So they'll be able to see, are they the same? Did the staff and the families match up and what they're all looking for, or do they have more work to do? But it's going to be a great process, and that's moving full steam ahead. I also just want to reference that last night we were at, Tom Healy invited me with the CMS PTA to keep them updated. So I was at their PTA meeting last night on the CMS EdSpec process, just that we're keeping everything moving along. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. And last but not least, I also want to say thank you, Joe Kelly, for organizing the parade. It was really, really fun. I enjoyed that. There were so many people, and it was much longer than I thought it would be. I was shocked, but thank you for that.
Okay, committee reports. I look at you, Joe. Do you want to go first?
Okay, I have got a couple of projects we're working on, but nothing to update us on. But I do have something that we have to talk about a little bit, and that's the road project. Now, unfortunately, we've hit a bit of a roadblock when it comes to the road project. And we have done a lot of developing, design, and we've come pretty close to be able to submitting an MI. But unfortunately, we have run out of funding because we put a certain amount of money aside for this. I talked to Sean, our CFO, and Sean said we no longer have money for this. So I work for free, so I'm very happy to continue whatever I can do, but we need the services of professionals, of architects and engineers, and our town people to submit things to. I will do my best to do what I could do, offering my services once again for free, but we have to figure out where we could fund further moving this road along. I don't know how we're going to do that, but we certainly have to talk about how we can do that. So we have to put our heads together and figure that out.
Yeah, I think it was something that we also didn't put into this upcoming capital plan, right? Because it was a timing issue. But it's something that I know that we've talked about more broadly with the town, and there might be even some federal money out there. So I think that this is something we should keep the conversation on, but.
I'll put my efforts into looking for some federal funding. I'll call around for possibly some private funding if that could be applicable as well. But unfortunately, the way things are right now, we've got to kind of grind to a halt and hoping to find a solution to fund it further. And we've done a lot of work, so we don't want to abandon the project because we have spent a lot of taxpayers' money on developing this safety road, and we don't want it to go too stale. So let's put our heads together and figure it out.
Very good. Anybody else? Sorry. I'll go, Ms. Downey.
I have a question for Joe. The egress that's part of phase one, not the full road. Could you just give us an update on, that's not complete yet, correct? Or it is?
Well, I can give you a bit, but I think Dr. Jones could jump in on the status of that. But I could say that we had to work out with the state DOT how we're going to create that, and working on some of their property and some of our property. And we finally had made progress on the agreement we're going to have with the DOT. And now we have to go through the normal agencies with the town to approve the documentation. And once that's done, we'll be able to finish the in and out of the phase one, which will also be the in and out of phase two, the safety road. So Tony, did I leave anything out there?
No, other than just that indemnification piece. We're grateful that the BET and RTM got us on their agenda. That's where Mr. O'Keefe was at 6:30 tonight at the BET meeting. They approved it, so now it'll move on. He'll be online shortly when he gets home.
That was a very good question. Thank you.
Committee updates over here? Okay. No? Okay, Ms. Hirsch.
Well, I wanted to thank SEAC for continuing to include us, in their monthly meetings. And I don't know why this thing is sounding so loud, but they had their meeting this month. And in addition to getting an update on the audit and where we are with that, which we'll be hearing a little bit about later this evening, so I won't go over that. They heard from different committee chairs, including some of the, they had a presentation on the new listening circle that they're going to be moving forward with, as well as some of the topics that they're going to be looking at for, parent sessions, including one on executive functioning skills, understanding UDL, and also how to manage some big emotions for our children. And so those are some of the topics they're going to be looking for parent educational meetings coming up. It was a great meeting, and a lot got discussed. You will also be hearing about the math textbook committee, which is coming tonight, and they're starting on the new honor science program and anatomy textbook. So you'll be getting updates on that coming soon. I think that discussion starts in next week. So.
Did you have any committee report or no?
Just briefly, the strategic plan committee did not meet. We meet next week. But recall there are two aspects to the strategic plan. There's the strategic planning committee, which is the board committee, and there's the leadership team, which is led by Dr. Jones at administration, and they continue to work on the timeline that we put out to the board last month. And we're hoping that next month we'll be able to present some of those preliminary discussions to the board as part of the April report.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, looks like then we're ready to move into our discussion items. First up is the ever popular 2021-2022 GH graduation date and last day of school. Dr. Jones.
Thank you. I believe that what is presented is what we're proposing. We're very thrilled that we were able to get an opinion to be able to change graduation a little bit earlier for our students. One thing that's not on here that I certainly would be in favor of, and I believe that GEA mentioned it tonight, is an early release on the 27th and the 28th. I did have a conversation with the principal and vice principal, Ralph Mayo, and also Dana Talata, just to kind of get a more understanding about how they will utilize those days. They're looking at on the 27th doing, moving up is not the right word, but more of a celebration of moving into the next level. So your juniors, that's kind of their official, we're class of 23. They did this at the end of last year and had some events for the students that were really fun and, made it a really kind of a coming together point for the students. So they're looking at doing that on the 27th. The 28th, the last day of school, it really doesn't change from what they always do. It's more checking back in, checking with teachers, checking on grades. Those of you that have had high schoolers probably remember that. One of the other questions that I also had is how they would handle something like absences. Because as you know, when you hit that like number 10, usually you get those letters in the mail. They are very accustomed at the end of the year to having families leave early. That is not new for them. And they said, we already have a solid process. We discussed what about a higher volume this year because it is that much later. They were not concerned about that at all. They understand that they're going to have students who are supposed to be at their job for summer camps. They have students who are traveling to do mission work. They have students, all kinds of things. But that is not unusual for them. They just expect a higher volume. So they feel like they're going to be able to manage that. The other thing we talked about is when would the exams fall? Because that's been a big question, and it would be all in that previous week. So they would not be, having exams obviously on the 27th.
Ms. Downey?
I just had one question, just kind of looking at this. I realize we talk about that the sixth graders get to end a day early. Could we do the ninth graders? Because they did start a day earlier as well. So maybe they only would have to come on the 27th. Is that an option?
I would have to go back and check the notes. I think that was modified I don't think they ended up being early, but I can certainly
In
go
a
back and
typical year,
check.
in a typical year, they would, right? So then we
Yes.
could kind of capture a day back somehow for them. But anyway, it's a difficult position we're in. It's unfortunate that the state didn't give us a waiver on this, but we're still, and it's kind of the lesser of the evils, this versus taking a couple of days in April. And I'm sure there are people who feel strongly one way or the other. So we're never going to make everyone happy, but I know we're trying to make the best out of the situation.
Sorry, Michael Joseph?
Yeah, Tony, could you talk a little bit about the nature of what we got from the legal opinion and some of the background on that and how certain we are about it, really?
On having the
For the-
180
for the high-
days.
For the high school.
And moving graduation. So the law changed in 2019. So we really haven't utilized it because we've been in COVID. And in the past, we could not set graduation before we knew we were going to be the 180th day of school, which would this year for high school would have been the 28th for 180 days. But I wanted to reach out to our school law attorney, who definitely understands this much better than anybody in the state. And the opinion really is that the way the law changed is that once you get past April 1st, we can actually we can go ahead and have a graduation date. And in fact, we can do it even for next year and get in front of it by changing the language on next year's calendar. And we're going to come back and look at that. If your calendar is originally set where your 180th day would have been, then you can actually go ahead and set a graduation date much earlier. In the past, you couldn't. Where it gets a little tricky is if you ask the Connecticut State Department of Education, it's how they count attendance after graduation. And they would say, like, your seniors are supposed to be on site. Most our seniors aren't on site anyway. They're all out at internships for the last, portion of high school. So it really doesn't impact us. It could impact other school districts more so. But that basically is it. And that is the person who wrote basically the school law book for Connecticut. So I trust his opinion.
The only thing, it makes sense. I'm not opposed to it. The only thing I worry about is we've got the opinion of this lawyer who's an expert. Is there a mechanism to get the opinion from the state itself? I just worry about a nightmare scenario where the state comes back in June and says you can't do this anymore.
Now, with the new law, you can graduate before the 180th day. That's really the clarifying point. And the way our calendar was posted, we're definitely okay on that piece.
Mr. Kelly?
Mine's not a question, but a bit of an observation. We've had a kid in the school system here since 1997 continuously. We have one more year. So we do kind of remember at the end of the year, this happening kind of a lot when you have a lot of snow days and and I know at home that you'd hear the yelling and screaming and complaints about the instability and uncertainty of the end of the school year because how many snow days, whether there was snow on the ground or not, why did we take those days? All that sort of stuff. I remember that, and I don't trust my memory that much anymore. So I did ask my wife if that was the case, and she said yes. It's been happening for years. Christina, you have older kids as well, so this is not the first time something like this has taken place, and I think it's kind of normal. Can you share? Well, maybe there is a question. Can you share with your experience and the other school districts that you might have worked in if similar things took place?
Connecticut's very unique. in that they're not like necessarily other states around the country, because in Connecticut, we must meet the hours and we must meet the days, both. Hours are always pretty easy, and we usually have a little bit extra. But it's the days in Connecticut that make it hard in the past. But again, the way the law's been written, it's going to be easier going forward. But in other states, you can actually do hours or you can do days. So if we were hours, we would not have made up hardly any days, because you also have flexibility when it's in hours just to add 10 minutes to a day, every day for 3 weeks. But it's just, that's something in Connecticut I would really like to work towards with our state representatives, and to see if we can help them model after some other states where they have more flexibility, because I think it's better for everybody.
And the goal, I'm sorry, one last follow-up. And the goal is to please 90% of the people with full expectations of some percentage being unhappy with the instability or uncertainty of the end of the school year. Is that fair?
I think when it's not stable, it is hard when you have people traveling, and in Connecticut, because our snow could come so late, it can make a difference. But again, going forward, for instance, like on this calendar going forward, we could have said graduation will be on the 21st or the 24th, because we had calculated the 180th. And if it goes past that, you can still graduate. So that, I think, is going to help us going forward.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Are there any concerns with respect to the fact that once graduation happens, once finals are over, that kids will just not come to school? And does that count against us in calculating whether or not we are actually having a school day by the number of absences that we have?
That will not count against us for a school day, but do we think it's challenging? It is every year, to be honest. If your exams are over, if they don't go right up into the last day, it is harder, but we have quite a few families that actually do leave early.
Ms. Hirsch?
I'm going to make myself the most unpopular board member at the moment. Much like Joe, I have memories of having these discussions for many, many years due to some wintry winters. And it has always been well known by the district that when we go over our 5 built-in snow days, we start to take from the April break. And I'm just curious, especially since it's 2 days, why, we are looking at adding days in June where we're looking for fun days and half days, as opposed to considering putting 2 days back into the April break, where we arguably have a large percentage of high school athletes that can't travel anyway, and actually gaining those days back as academic days, especially for students in AP courses. They've really lost a lot of ground with the snow days and things that we've had, and they have to figure out how to get all of that education in before those tests in May. So I'm just curious why we are not considering that. It's something that's written on the calendar. It's known that this happens here. So I was just curious.
This is, from my perspective, I don't see this like a normal year, first of all. I think I look at the Good Friday and Easter. There are so many families that are traveling that haven't seen family in 2 years. Some of them are going out of the country. And I think that, they have to book that stuff early. And I worry on several fronts. I worry about just kind of the mental health of the teacher who feels like I need to cancel my trip and I'm going to have to stay. And because it really is challenging right now. I don't think people realize we're not completely out of it. So I worry about that. I also worry about having such a high absenteeism rate that we have kids sitting in a cafeteria like this because I don't have enough people to staff. And that's a genuine concern. We've done really well. We have a sub incentive. It's working generally for us on a daily basis. But I can tell you right now, our subs are probably traveling too. So, and on a Good Friday right now, we have over 100 teachers out. So on a bad Friday or a bad Wednesday, it's going to be a lot more than that. So it's a multitude of reasons. But I do think it's different coming out of COVID. And I, some of the students we talk about, like their AP teachers, their AP teacher may not be there. And I did check on the athlete thing. So one of you asked me that, and thank you for that. Pete was able to let me know that right now, mandatory, there's 35 athletes that play tennis. That's all that's mandatory. I do know students, if you're a varsity athlete, you want to be there. And we have 285 varsity athletes. So some of those athletes will definitely be in town that week, but it's not a huge, huge number.
Well, I was just going to say as a follow-up, having a high school athlete, doesn't matter whether they're varsity or junior varsity, they are told they are not to travel because there are games that are scheduled during that week, JV games as well as freshmen. I will say this is something that we should discuss going forward because even with staff, they are told in advance that April, we can cut from April. And we knew far in advance that we were inching up on those days. Not that I want to be the most unpopular board member, but I do want to focus on the fact that we do need to make sure these students are getting, where they need to be before their finals, before their APs, before they go out on their awesome student internships for the seniors. So I just weigh the difference between 2 half fun days in June when nobody will be there. So
I have to say, I kind of weighed both those thoughts too. Karen, I know I have an athlete and therefore I hope everyone thinks of me positively when they're on their vacation. But but the reality is that there are many who do have vacations planned. And while not a perfect situation, I think the bigger takeaway from me, at least, is that we need to continue to talk to our state reps about the fact that we have the tools on days to teach remotely. And those days should count. And then we wouldn't be in this situation. We should at least take a few, pages from COVID. And some of the positives that came out of that is that we really improved our ability to teach remotely. And so while not perfect, it would have been a nice thing to have done this year, but it just wasn't allowed. So with that, I think this is the only other thing I was thinking is, Kwame, since you're still here, is maybe we could use those fun days for those public speeches that you talked about in our student meetings. And you could turn those, I don't know if you're going to go to school because you're a senior, but but that might be your opportunity for those speeches that we talked about. So. If there is nothing else, I was going to take it to a vote, but.
Kwame is clearly the smartest politician in the room.
You're right. I'm sorry. It's not a vote.
It's
This
a
is
first read.
I'm sorry. Is there anything else on this?
I know it's a first read, but is this something that we need to bring back, or could we vote to approve this so that families that are looking to, if we're talking about April break, people already have plans. You want to make sure that people who have plans towards the end of the year and have graduation can have some kind of security in knowing that these are the dates we're focused on.
We can do a waiver of if we suspend the first read, we have I think 3/4 of us have
I think
to
6
say.
of us have to agree.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm asking if anybody else would weigh that, would be interested in that.
I'm happy to see if 2/3 of us vote in favor of making it a vote tonight. Would you like to make a motion, Karen, to suspend our rules?
If I could remember the policy number off the top of my head, sure. But I'm happy to make a motion to waive our second read on this policy. To waive our second read to vote on the school calendar for graduation and end of school day.
I will second.
Okay, all in favor of suspending our rules? Cody, okay, that passes 8-0. So now we can actually take a vote, but I'm going to make the motion to approve this calendar for 2021, 2022 graduate date and last day of school with one amendment to have June 27th also as an early release in addition to June 28th. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Sorry, my motion, Karen, was just to add June 27th as an early release day. Mhm. Okay, so with that on the table, all in favor? And Cody, so Karen, you're a yes? Okay, that passes 8-0. Looks like we got a calendar set. Thank you so much. That was a good idea, Karen. Yeah, exactly. You were just trying to save yourself for putting it out there. Okay. Next up is the Policy Governance Committee update. Ms. Downey.
Yes, thank you. So before you all, you can see there's a spreadsheet as the document. You may recall that as part of our migration to K policies, we needed to retire our old procedures, which were the E's and the L's and things like that. We've been focusing on the E's. So in terms of changing our procedures, remembering that the board does not vote on retiring procedures except when required by statute. For example, we did it on the suicide prevention policy and procedures. I want to thank Dr. Jones for, as you can see, she's done a lot of work on this. It was a backlog for us the last couple of years with different superintendents and the movement of the committee, a little pandemic thrown in, so we got a little behind, but I thank you, Dr. Jones, for rolling her sleeves up, and there will be more of these coming forward to the board, and this is really for information on the board's behalf. We did not attach all of the policies because that would be a lot, but everyone's free. I think there weren't really any questions, but just be advised that over the course of time, as we continue the process of the crosswalk cleanup, we will be bringing more of these to the board.
Great. Thank you guys so much for doing this. I know that this was a laborious process from when I was on PGC, and we did not accomplish nearly as much as the three of you just did. So thank you very much. Moving on to policy, to GHS math textbooks. Dr. Caraballo.
So good evening, Madam Chair, board members, Dr. Jones, and colleagues. We're honored to present to you our new algebra and geometry textbook choices. I'd like to thank our co-chairs, Andrew Byrne and Lori Mulligan, and all of our committee members for their thoughtful conversations throughout our meeting. Also, I'd like to thank Dr. Todd White for facilitating our meetings. We have a video to share with you that explains our processes, and you'll hear from some of the teachers and the 2 students who participated in this process. We'll take questions after the video presentation. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Greenwich Public Schools presentation detailing the adoption process for Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, leading us to a recommendation that is being made to the board tonight. The committee members represent a broad range of stakeholders across the Greenwich Public Schools. It included parents, teachers in varying positions, the mathematics program assistant and learning facilitators. We had building representation, Board of Education members, and central office personnel, all participating as part of the process. The committee met 8 times between November and January. As soon as the materials were available, teachers both on the committee and off began reviewing and digging into them very deeply. Then in February, the committee narrowed down the choices to the top programs and had a parent night. Finally, the committee made their final recommendation and sent that to the superintendent. The 4 programs reviewed were Big Ideas Math, Envision Math, Into AGA, and Reveal Math. Tonight, the committee would like to recommend Big Ideas Math. The Big Ideas Math program was consistently a high choice among committee members, as well as among Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 teachers who reviewed the program. Big Ideas Math provides both print and digital resources for differentiated instruction, enabling all students to succeed. Big Ideas also allows for a K-10 learning continuum since the district adopted Big Ideas for K-8 last year. The list of criteria and priorities was definitely long. It allowed the committee to take a look at the materials through a variety of different lenses, and again, in order to figure out which one best meets the needs of the district and the children in the district. Here's part 2 of the criteria and priorities. As you can see, it was a very long list of things to consider. Big Ideas checks a lot of the boxes in an effective math program. It provides a balanced approach to mathematics instruction, incorporating conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and practical application in every lesson. There's embedded differentiation for students who are on level, above level, and below level, along with supports for students such as English language learners. It has an extensive assessment suite that allows teachers options for both formative and summative assessments. The dynamic classroom allows teachers to customize the lesson plans and the materials to meet the specific needs of the students in front of them. There's also embedded professional development at the point of use in every chapter and lesson, again through Lori's notes. Big Ideas has a lot of key features. There's built-in enrichment and remediation materials. Teachers have everything in one place. It is aligned to the Connecticut Core Standards, and supports are provided for students and for parents who may be trying to help students. There's also RTI supports. Big Ideas has a strong research base, building on the work of John Hattie, Joe Bowler, and Robert Marzano. There are ongoing assessments, both pre and post assessments, which are customizable and also generate reports for teachers. And again, all resources are editable and available both in print and digital formats. Big Ideas has several features that support student engagement. There is the connection and the partnership with National Geographic that helps to bring mathematics to life from real-world problem sets and application. The real-time feedback for students is built in, along with the self-reflection. And there's the homework app where work can be done offline and then connect to Wi-Fi to upload it. Let's take a look at modeling of mathematics in real life with this example. How does Big Ideas help us in reaching all students? Well, again, we have various teaching resources that allow for varying levels, along with reteaching and enrichment or extension activities. Big Ideas considered the depth of knowledge levels around questioning, along with differentiation in student books for English language learners. National Geographic videos feature all genders and races, so our whole student body will be represented. There are QR codes for remediation for students and for parents as well, and those exist both in English and Spanish. There are dig deeper enrichment needs, resources for special ed, and again, resources for the response to intervention.
To use. This is a user-friendly dashboard that makes it easy to navigate. The multi-language glossary and the ability to add a co-teacher helps to meet the needs of all learners.
I think Big Ideas will be a very good textbook for students because it has access to a digital website that has good videos and a step-by-step process on how to do certain problems that kids could have an issue with.
As stated earlier, the materials are also available in Spanish, as you can see here. Big Ideas has several features that make it attractive to parents. There are resources available in a variety of languages. There are both print and digital resources available. Big Ideas offers evening tutoring hours. And along with that, there are QR codes that allow for reteaching of lessons so that students can access explanations outside of class. There were several features that the teachers noted. First, the program is written with math teachers and professional development is delivered by practicing math teachers. There's a strong scope and sequence for teachers to follow. The resources are available that show how and when to use them. All materials are aligned to the Connecticut Core Standards, and they're in a very teacher-friendly format. All materials are editable, allowing the teacher to customize lessons for the students in front of them, along with their unique presentation styles.
The reason I chose Big Ideas as my #1 frontrunner for our textbooks
First, from a geometry lens, it is extremely applicable to real life scenarios, and I think it would hook our students in to be more interested in our content. From an algebra lens, it definitely is rigorous and maybe more rigorous than the content we currently use, but it's something that could be adapted to all of our levels.
One of the strengths in the Big Idea series that I find to be important is the content and support material covers a wide span from quite rigorous, which is a must for our honors geometry classes, to prerequisite material, both online and in print, that will allow for differentiation among students who are struggling. A second strength that I find to be important is that the transition from the middle school to the high school should go smoothly, given that Big Ideas is consistent with the texts being used at the middle school level, and the fact that the website is user-friendly for both students and teachers.
Professional development should always be a consideration in the adoption process. Big Ideas has built-in professional development with digital professional learning for teachers, which includes a video library. There's also Lori's notes throughout the book where she shares impact strategies. In addition to that, there is a plan for professional development starting in May of 2022, assuming, of course, that the materials are approved by the board, where teachers are given an introduction to the program and go ahead and get access codes, which will allow them access to print materials, scope and sequence, assessments, dashboards, really the entire program. During the summer, we'll offer optional professional development days on using the resources for teachers who can dig in deeper during the summer. And in August, as we start the 2022 school year, we'll provide professional learning and planning in the use of the materials. Throughout the first 2 years of the program, there will be professional development for teachers to answer questions and plan for upcoming units once per trimester. And the focus of that PD will be teacher driven based on what they're asking for more help with. Lori's notes have been mentioned multiple times, so we wanted to give you an example. The Big Ideas approach to rigor involves balancing a conceptual understanding with both procedural skill and fluency through application. Big Ideas complies with accessibility guidelines, including audio descriptions where appropriate, captions, text in varying colors, contrast, and resizing options, and assistive technology support through the web browsers. A number of other Connecticut districts are already using Big Ideas for Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 with much success. The prime consideration in any adoption has to be the students. Big Ideas allows for a more tailored approach with acceleration and remediation. It makes for a smoother transition between middle and high school. The materials are designed to support students both at home and in the classroom. There's homework help and a homework app for added flexibility. And the bottom line is, when we help teachers, students, and parents with an abundance of resources that meet individual student needs, we help all of our students.
Okay, any questions?
Ms. Costa?
So,
All right, sorry, apparently Karen Hirsch, who's on the committee, has to go first.
Well, no, I don't have a
So-
question. I just was going to add support, but you can
Mm.
let her ask the question. I mean, I spent hours doing this, but no problem.
Let her go. All right, Ms. Hirsch.
I don't know. I spent hours on the committee and seeing all of the presentations and programs, and I just wanted to speak on behalf of the committee as to why these, I know we heard a lot from the teachers and why we were involved, but, the committee was debating back and forth as to whether to use to recommend more than one textbook for the different programs versus one for the different math programs. And I know Mr. Byrne mentioned, that having Big Ideas took the lead really at the very end, because the program in itself is Big Ideas is focused specifically on math, whereas a lot of the other companies have multiple different textbooks in different areas. So every dollar of funding goes back towards right back into the math program for this. And they really reinvest consistently in their program. It's rigorous and it maximizes the potential for all of our learners, from those who need added supports to those who want to go ahead and learning even in their own classrooms. And we have so many students at the high school that are such advanced math students, yours included, that like to learn more than just what's taught in the classroom. This program will really add a lot of consistency and help for our educators. It is going to be a K through 10 program at this point. And we also, for those who asked where the funding was, there is information on the cost of this built in there. We get 6 years. We got discounts and a lot of things for free included in this program because we are already using the lower, using it for our K-8. And, the adoption of this would require, like any other book, supplemental resources, many of which we already have built in. But ultimately, this program has recently won awards for the Textbook Excellence, the 2022 Textbook Award of Excellence. And honestly, it's something that with all the student supports built in, the evening tutors, reteaching, and then all of the training for the teachers that are built in over the next 6 years, this is something that really stood out from the pack. And, you could hear from the students, they really felt engaged when looking at the program as well.
Thank you. Ms. Costin.
I thank you for all the work on this. It's very compelling. My question is it accessible for the visually impaired?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. That was a very important piece for us to make sure that it was accessible for all.
Ms. Downey?
I know Ms. Hirsch just made reference to a cost, but I didn't really see it. It wasn't clear in the documents about just to compare, because when we vote on it, we obviously should know what the cost is. So Ms. Caraballo, do you have anything you
Yes,
can?
Big Ideas was just over $119,000 for 6 years, and Savas was $155,408. Am I correct, Mr. Byrne?
You are, and Big Ideas also included all the professional learning opportunities for our teacher, whereas at Savas that was not included.
Thank you.
That was a very Republican question, Ms. Downey. Thank you.
I'm working on it.
Yes, Michael Joseph.
Yeah, so first of all, let me just, on the process side of things, I really appreciate the video. As the board knows, I'm a fan of videos. I think this was a terrific, I really appreciate the work you put in there, because I think it was a terrific resource for the community to get a sense of what this program's about. I appreciate that you made sure to include student voice in there, as well as examples from the text. We read about Lori's notes, but then you gave visual examples. So thank you, Dr. Caraballo and your team for doing that. Hopefully this is the start of a trend, and if we get some of these videos out earlier in the week, then we can spend the board time on conversation and instead of presentation. But I understand the first time, but thank you for that. Earlier in the week, we had a back and forth about how things like the capstone project and other instructional strategies are going to inform and augment Big Ideas. I was wondering if you could comment on that. Or someone
I'll
else.
let Mr. Byrne comment on that, since he is the one who uses it and really monitors that.
Thank you for the question. Certainly several years ago when the Common Core was adopted, some may be familiar, not only a curriculum was adopted, but a set of practices, 8 practices that we try to infuse in each of our lessons. And one of them is mathematical modeling. And so that's been an area that the department has taken very seriously over the last number of years, because it's one thing to learn mathematics, but if you're not able to apply it or understand where it connects to the real world, it's not very useful, to be quite honest with you. So through a variety of curriculum initiatives over the last couple of years, of which I've just joined the department, as many of you know, we've created capstone experiences in each of our courses where there's a common experience where students are being asked to do exactly that, bring together a variety of topics and solve a new or novel or authentic problem. So that's something that we hope to be able to do more with Big Ideas. The connection with National Geographic especially is appealing to all of us. If you had a chance to see some of the videos, they really do allow students to see themselves several years down the line and understand where the math is being connected. And we hope to be able to grow capstone-like experiences as a result of that partnership. So the work is underway, it's going well. And again, it's something that we hope to encourage to further in the next 6 years under the support of Big Ideas.
Yeah, just thank you. Just one other point, which is just a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I think when we, on the public document side of things, I think we need to always be mindful of the language. In area 3, the first bullet says Big Ideas Math has a suite of resources which address different learning styles. I suspect that came from from the Big Ideas folks myself. We know that learning styles is one of the great misconceptions of our field. It's a neuromyth. There is no such thing as different learning styles. We just need to be, but many people still believe there is such a thing. There's folks that are visual learners, and there are folks that are kinesthetic learners and things like that. And that's all, we know that's false, right? The science is, and I'm not telling you all anything you don't know. We know that doesn't exist. So we just have to be, cognitive science has proved that. We just have to be, I think we just have to be mindful on public documents because it's such a common misconception. I think we just have to be continually mindful of how we phrase that when we talk about these things.
I read your article on that, so I know that.
I'm going to disagree with you, but
You didn't read his article then?
I'm a product of these learning theories.
Sorry, can I raise my own hand? One thing I was going to say on this is I think it's, if it happens to work for the high school, I think that's a wonderful situation, because I think the hardest part is that when you keep switching math programs for the teachers and the students, there's this continuous learning curve. And so I really like, and I know that I've been really impressed with Big Ideas Math for my student, but there are so many resources out there that I'm not even sure she's aware of yet. And so the fact that you could start to learn that in middle school and you move to high school, that you would then really be adept with the system, and then of course the teachers as well. But my question is, and this is perhaps silly, is why doesn't it go to up through calculus or multivariable calculus? Is that just not an option?
Well, I was going to say, I know I asked this earlier and they can probably answer this. We just don't have those textbooks up for renewal yet.
That's accurate. And they're actually just starting to look at some of those courses. So I know they just released a pre-calculus book and their hopes to also expand into calculus. So hopefully in the years to come, we can go back to the board and consider those as options as well.
Great. Anything else on this? This will obviously come back to us. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Next up is CMS update on EdSpec process. Dr. Jones.
So I would like to have had a much more detailed timeline. Let me just say that before tonight. Over the last, I guess we've been at this for 11 days. I feel like we've made huge progress. It was approved on Monday night by the RTM. On Tuesday, we started with the consultant. They were at CMS all day long. meeting with teachers. So we're having a very aggressive timeline. One thing we're meeting again tomorrow is just trying to get the next few weeks settled because they had a commitment the week before our spring break. We have spring break. They're not great times to be having community meetings when you're on spring break and people think, you don't want their input. So we're trying to nail down some dates. The other things is our nights are so full between the budget meetings. As you know, we're getting ready to get really busy. The budget meetings, we had the extra board meeting. We have 2 extra board meetings that have also been placed. So we're trying to find the dates. So let me just say that. So we did our final RTM approval. We have, and it is up on the screen behind me, just so that you could have a visual. We had the consultant signed, and it is CSG who has worked with us on all of our reimbursements. I think initially one of the biggest reimbursements they were working on was New Lebanon, but they have an arm of the agency that actually does this work. So we contracted them ready to go on the Tuesday. We began on the 15th, and you can just see all the different groups that they literally were there for the entire day. Started at, I want to say 7:30, 7:45 in the morning. And Mr. Healy was ready to go with all the small groups coming in and meeting with them so that each team, and there's just tremendous amount of notes that they also took that they've shared in what? Things like storage, what kind of storage do you need? What do you need with kitchen equipment? I mean, it's pretty intensive. And this team, I will say, it's a team of really 2, are very, very experienced. This is what they do. And one of them is a previous principal, previous, I think, assistant superintendent, brings a lot of educational knowledge along with the ed spec knowledge. So they knew exactly what they were doing to get the work started. On the 22nd, they were back, again, meeting with all types of teams. And then they extended that and also started meeting with those non-academic areas, again, like the cafeteria and those sorts of areas that aren't instructional, trying to make sure they're getting good feedback. We were at the CMS PTA last night. We will have survey input that begins this week, just trying to get a broader sweep from everybody. We have a faculty meeting after school on April the 6th. And I can say from what Tom has said, the faculty is very excited because, this was really quite unanticipated that we would be at this juncture. And so just the idea that you're actually starting to talk about spaces. He was sharing with the PTA last night how many of them came with drawings of what they want to see. And they had to actually tell them, no, that's not the phase that we're in yet. That will come later, but they're just so excited. And then, of course, we want to do one really big community meeting, probably more than one, obviously, but we need to do a lot more input meetings, and those are the dates we're trying to nail down. So I'm going to continue the work tomorrow to getting us through the next few weeks, but I feel like we're going to be right on target, where we need to be. And again, we've got a team that knows what they're doing, and I think it will be on budget and on time, and we'll try to get it in front of the board. And, before we actually contracted with them, we had a pre-meeting, which they knew that, if they couldn't share with us what their skill set was and we didn't feel comfortable, they wouldn't be working with us. Shared an ed spec. They just finished a middle school somewhere else in Connecticut. They're very adept at understanding how square footage plays into the whole reimbursement as well, which is fantastic. So along with all of this, I'm also working on our new 8 to 10 year projection, which we have to have for CMS that gets submitted. So we're updating those, which they need so that they know how those square footage actually accounts for the number of students that are anticipated. The other thing that's working simultaneously is Dan literally immediately, the next day was working on the soil and how we're going to go about scheduling that. And, one of the challenges with the soil work that we want to do is at some point, when you do that, the equipment's very large. It's going to close the field down for a couple of weeks. And so we're trying to actually get a really good timeline and schedule from the company that's going to do that work. So everybody is really working hard and aggressive to get this where we need to be so that we can get the building committee started, assuming that our design and everything passes.
Ms. Downey.
To that end, just kind of thinking through timing, because I tend to think in logistics. If we really want to have a building committee formed in June, after the votes on the budget, it seems to me that the ed specs are going to have to come back to us in May. Has CSG, or do you feel like that's feasible, not to pardon the pun of, since we're not doing feasibility study, but doable, say for our regular, I mean, I'm sure we'd all be happy to do a special meeting if needed, but just knowing what the RTM timelines are for their meetings, could you just give any thoughts that, or has there been any discussions about that?
Oh, the very first meeting. And I actually said the end of April. So, and they were very confident, but I also allowed us a little bit of time because you may want to discuss it for a couple of meetings. And, you know, and if that's the case, then it could be May, but absolutely, they felt very confident about end of April.
Fabulous, because yeah, then I think for your agenda planning.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Well, back to the ed specs. Now, it's obviously a new build. So how much of the ed specs is basically taking a middle school, 700 kids, and kind of taking it off the shelf, what's needed and required in our state, and then sort of tailoring that to what we kind of want as a community. So we have to be starting somewhere with requirements for those kids, the 3 grades, the kids. And where are we just off the shelf at 50%, at 30%, at 70% of basically, we know we need this many classrooms, we know we need this size, we know we need a gym, a cafeteria, all that sort of stuff. Where do we start with off the shelf and then have to progress into the tailored needs we have?
You know, when you talk about off the shelf, it's really more about the guidelines they give us for like the class size, you know, what square footage. And so they look at what do we have now? What is the state? What is the guidance from the state that, you know, would go into that reimbursable amount? So those things are more off the shelf, but all the discussions that they're having with these small groups, that's where they're hearing things from the teachers. Like, we want to make sure we don't have one long haul like we used to build 50 years ago. We want to make sure there are collaboration spaces. And if you think about how New Lebanon is built, for instance, where they had these little breakout spaces for students to meet, that's really how teachers work today. So all of that will be specific for us, and the feedback that they're getting about what's going to be the really important elements. They know that they want, like off of the media center, for instance, they want the media center to be more a hub of the building, not in the back of the building. Or so it's elements like that really they listen to everybody that they're meeting with, and you know, every staff member that wants to meet with them will have that opportunity. And then of course in the community outreach, it will be the same. You know, we're probably going to hear, we can't lose any field space. I mean, we're going to hear things like that. So they take all of that into account. So it's hard to say a percentage, but the ed spec is put together based on all of the input that they're getting. And it will be a lot.
So it's the accelerated combined feasibility study and ed spec production is what we're combining here in accelerated rate, which we certainly need, and I think most do support. So it's just, I have to think that at least across the country that there has to be a lot of middle schools that have been built recently or in the building process that we can sort of take that information and use what's necessary and needed nationally, more specifically statewide, and sort of have a greater starting point since it's a new build. Having gone through a feasibility study with a restoration of a building, it's complicated because you have to address spaces as they are. New build, I would think we'd get a greater head start, which would help us accelerate through this early process like we plan to, because it is a new build.
It does really help because we're talking about spaces right now. And you just have to keep reminding people that, you know, this feasibility, you're not doing those renderings again, which generally that would have been the second time because we have the master plan, we have the feasibility renderings. Then when the design committee comes together, they do it again. So this is really not so much about seeing pretty pictures of what it might look like. It's really about what do you want the spaces to do? What do the learning spaces need to look like? And I think, you know, as you collect all of that information from all of the staff and from the community, it gives you a really good solid ed spec that you hand off to the building committee, and they know you need to think about, for the architect, how are you going to have collaborative spaces? And you hope that they come back and even talk to the teachers again, you know, and talk to the principal and make sure when they get to 20% or 30% design that they're continuing to get the input so that it's developing in the right direction, which is generally what building committees do.
One final question. At what point does a member of our Board of Education participate in these discussions?
That's part of the scheduling discussion I want to have tomorrow. I would really like to actually manage it a little bit like we did with our PCG conversations with the board so that they can work around all of your schedules to be able to have individual conversations, or 2 or 3 of you, just where we're not over the number that, we can't have. So that you can talk about the ed spec, you can talk, with the people that are working on it. We certainly could put it as a, like, here's where we are, and invite the team, to one of our meetings, but I guess we have 31st and the 7th, but those are both. Yeah, well, we can, I'm sure they would be more than happy as long as their schedules are open.
Good, yeah, because I'd certainly like to have board representation from now moving forward, and if not now, in the very near future. Thank you.
Michael Joseph.
Yeah, I was just wondering, obviously, the building is first and foremost, an educational building. But Central Middle School provides many other services to communities. We know, RTM, basketball, maker spaces, lots of different. So I'm wondering, in this process, outside of the central community, where do other community members in town, since it serves, because it's of its centralized location, how do other people in the community be able to voice the needs for that building, I guess?
And that's part of that whole community meeting aspect, is making sure that the invites are beyond just your school community, that we're getting it out there so people know how to contribute. That's why even the survey input can be really important for somebody whose schedule doesn't really allow them to go to a physical meeting. So we're trying to make sure we're hitting on all of those different avenues. But I can say, even in the first day, it was made very clear that people, were sharing with the consultants that, look, this is where our RTM holds their meetings. So, coming back with an auditorium that only holds 200 people is not going to work, that's going to be important to this community. So they're having those discussions as well. And I will say, Tom Healy has been phenomenal also. I mean, he knows the building and what the needs are from the community, because he sees the usage. And I think we're more aware of usage this summer than ever, because, this is probably one of the most challenging summers that we've had for facilities, trying to find summer camps and summer school, because GHS campus is closed, Eastern is closed, Western has a portion that's closed, and then of course we have the work at Central going on. So we've dislocated pretty much every program we have this summer. So that's right at the forefront of our mind, how important the building is for all the programming that happens well beyond just the school day.
Ms. Costa.
I just wanted to say, I want to just wonder aloud whether we've looked at other spaces, what other schools in our community have built. I mean, I did a virtual tour of Greenwich Country Day because I couldn't go onto the campus. My daughter went to camp there, never saw the inside of it. And boy, to see what's possible in a school is really extraordinary. And I mean, that is an extraordinary campus. So I hope we can dream a little bit. I know we have financial constraints that are different from that school, but boy, oh boy, what's possible now in a school building is really extraordinary.
Yeah, I will say Mr. Healy and I also had that discussion, just making sure that, especially when you get into the design phase, that we're looking at lots of different buildings around the country. And I can say for me, I've been around school construction everywhere I've ever been. It's just, we've been building. And one of the best things is just seeing what is out there, because, buildings today don't look like they used to. I mean, the spaces are different. And I think it's finding a really good balance between having a wonderful, amazing 21st century building and making sure that you're also doing that with a lot of common sense and reasonableness in your approach.
Ms. Hirsch.
Just to sort of tag on to Mike's comments, are we also going to be ensuring that we have an opportunity to speak to other town departments in advance? It's not, as he noted, it's not just used by our schools, it's a community. For instance, for fields, parks and rec, DPW for traffic, because I know we'll have neighbors with concerns as to what's going in, and making sure that the traffic flow is done well, so that there's good in and out. And not too much. So I just didn't know if we're going to be including them in these discussions for the ed specs.
We will, and Park and Rec is a great partner. So they manage our field. So I will say one of the very preliminary discussions that we'll have to decide, do you want to have it in ed spec or not, is trying to design without changing the entrance and exits, because we all believe that could slow the project down for 2 years. It's really difficult when you change a driveway and put it next to somebody else's house versus where it is right now and has been for many years. So we're thinking about kind of all of those different components.
Just because I know we held off on doing the field there, but we know the field needs to be redone as well. So I just figured if Parks and Rec is involved, I know that you guys did a whole field study and everything with Ms. Doe, so.
Nothing else? Okay, thank you. Next up, PCG recommendation update, Dr. Stacy.
Is there a way to turn the microphone on so it stays on? Underneath. Oh, so if there we go. I'm like, I thought it went off when I moved my finger. Good evening, Chair Stowe, Dr. Jones, and members of the board. Tonight, I'm giving a small part of the PCG recommendation update, specifically looking at some of the expansion of the programs that we're looking at for next year. Next slide. However, before I get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about the MTSS and give a little update on that, as tomorrow being our professional development day, we will be spending the first 2 hours, the entire GPS staff, going over our new MTSS, or start the conversation about our new MTSS process. At this point, we have had a multidisciplinary group meeting weekly to develop a draft manual. Tomorrow, we're going to start our presentation and talk to our staff about some of the thoughts and processes behind that and get some of their input, and also tying it to the Universal Design for Learning professional development that we have been doing during the last two professional development days. The introduction of common language around the tiers of support to provide interventions to students has been a big push this year, so that we are establishing some consistency amongst the district. And we've been identifying some universal screening tools for mental health needs, for reading, for math, for behavior. And so it's been great having so many people together, and it's really exciting that we're kicking that off tomorrow. So I just wanted to share that as an exciting move that we're going forward.
Stacey, could you remind the public what MTSS stands for?
Multi-tiered systems of support. Thank you. Next slide. So earlier this school year, Dr. Jones, in her budget presentation, identified some priorities that we were looking at as part of the budget. And so part of that is looking at some additional programming and increasing and developing our continuum of services for students with special needs. And so tonight we're going to be looking at each of these programs and giving a little bit more detail. While the Unique Learner Program and the expansion of co-teaching tonight is focusing on the elementary programs that we're developing, I just want to touch upon that we do have similar programs at the middle and high school. And so what we're looking at is expanding that age-wise, as well as each of the programs is looking at expanding various options for students. So we're trying to make sure that there's different types of programming for students, and it runs between elementary, middle, and high school. So we have that. Next slide. So the first is our Unique Learner Program. So we've talked about, or we've discussed this before, that this is a specific program for students who are on an alternate standards program. So they're students who are on the modified and adaptive curriculum that's aligned with the CT alternative assessment. We're specifically looking at grades 3 through 5 in a small class setting with no more than 12 students. Typically, we would want to cap the class around 10, but we know that sometimes we have students who are coming and students who are leaving. When we look at some of our programming needs, we know that students move into the districts in the middle of the year. We have students who move out, and so we want to keep some flexibility. The classroom is staffed with a special education teacher, and that right now would be a position we would post and could be a current teacher that's in Greenwich Public Schools that's interested in switching their their current assignment, or it could be somebody from outside of the district. We would also have paraprofessionals in the classroom that would be part of the main staff. So there would be a special education teacher and the 2 paraprofessionals as full-time staff in that program. And then if there's additional staffing for paraeducators as needed, that would be identified as a case-by-case basis. But in addition, we also have the push-in services and the support of the speech and language pathologist, the school psychologist, the BCBA, assistive technology specialist. So the students in this program usually require a high level of service. So we would have multiple service providers providing the services to these students. And the students that are in the program, as I mentioned before, are eligible for the Connecticut Alternative Assessment. With that, it's not identified as one specific disability as a student who is eligible, but more a profile of a student. So this could include students with autism, with intellectual or language disabilities. You don't have to have a certain eligibility to be in the program. You need to be on that alternate assessment pathway. Next slide. So the purpose of the program is really to help students lay that, to acquire the academic foundation and communication skills that they need, as well as some adaptive daily living skills. So our students in this program require a variety of services, as I mentioned before, with different service providers. So there's a focus on the communication aspect. So we would work on that communication all day long, working on functional life skills as well as functional academics. How are we matching those skills? And so it's really making sure that we can also develop the social skills with our peers. So even though this is a special class, these students would still be participating in grade level specials, in field trips, in lunch, in recess. So this is where the academics happen. It's not to be in a class where they're in there all day long and don't have access to their general education peers. So it really is a way to meet both the academic and adaptive daily living skill needs of the students, as well as to provide interactions and the ability to interact with their peers in a school setting. Next slide. So the second program is the elementary co-teaching. So as mentioned before, Greenwich has had co-teaching in a couple of our middle schools. We expanded it to our high school this year. And several of our elementary schools have pockets of co-teaching in their schools. This program is specifically looking at trying to create one school that has a continuum of kindergarten through 5th grade, as opposed to different grade levels in different places. The students are working on their general education core curriculum and are, participating in the class. The difference is that we have 2 teachers. So for some of our students with disabilities, this falls in between, as we just talked about, our unique learner program. And then we have our resource where students are in general ed with pullout. The students that we're looking at require just a higher level of support, which would have that second teacher, that special education teacher in there, so that we're providing that opportunity for them to be in the least restrictive environment, which is the general education class, and still be able to receive the level of special education support that they need. Next slide. The next position that we have introduced is the inclusion specialist. So Greenwich should pride itself on the fact that we look at the least restrictive environment for students and that the vast majority of our students are in the general education classrooms. But that doesn't mean that our teachers don't sometimes need assistance in providing accommodations to students in the classroom, and asking for some kind of help of how do I support this student better in the classroom. Currently, we have some people contracted to provide this inclusion support for some of our students in the district. This is looking at not only being able to support those students with our own in-house, but also we have a number of students that might not be receiving that support that do require that support. There's a number of teachers that ask for support in helping them understand how they can accommodate or modify curriculum. I just had a conversation with a middle school AP yesterday about her general education teacher saying that they need some more ideas on how to be able to accommodate some middle school curriculum. So having this person will really be able to support our students and our staff in being able to integrate our students into the classroom better and making sure that we're providing the highest level of curriculum possible for students. Next slide. And then the last position is the reading lab teacher. This position is a change from a current position where we had a reading teacher who was who was working as a trainer. This is switching this so that this person would be working directly with students. We have some students with some very significant needs, and that we want somebody with a high level of reading training to be able to go in and provide some very, very intensive support to our students to move them along. And then at the same time, working with their teachers in providing additional strategies to be able to work with them and then help transition that student back to the teacher on their campus. So it's not meant for, I'm going to work with you for the next couple of years. It's really supposed to be a very intensive intervention and then be able to work with the school staff on, do they need additional training in a different program, and to get them up to speed so that they can then take over those services. But we have a number of students who are struggling in reading, and we really want to be able to address that. So tried to make it short to give you guys time for questions. So those are the programs. What questions can I answer?
Ms. Costin.
So I love that co-teaching is expanding. So is it going to be district-wide K-1? Like, is this for next year?
So for next year, what we're looking at is identifying one specific school and doing a kindergarten and first. And then we would look at expanding it so that we would eventually be able to get to a K-5 so that our students would be able to stay in one school. We wouldn't want somebody to start in kindergarten at Cos Cob, we're here, and then need to go to another school when they're in third grade. So we would eventually keep adding a year to develop the whole continuum. And then we can also start looking at expanding that to additional schools. But for right now, we're looking at just doing it as one school, and it would be a district program. So it wouldn't only be for those students at that school, it would be for students throughout the district. So we're looking at a school that would be like a central location.
So children would have to magnet into a program that had co-teaching?
It wouldn't be a magnet, it would be a PPT decision. So for this, it's specifically for students who require a higher level of special education service than just the typical resource model. They require to have that special education teacher all day. One of the things that I heard from many parents in talking when I came here is the transition from preschool to kindergarten is very difficult for some of our students with more significant disabilities who need to have that access to that special education teacher throughout the day. So this isn't a program for every student. It really is looking at specific students who require that level of service.
I guess my issue is that, you know, a child at Cos Cob who does have, you know, significant needs and would benefit from this program, but then somebody else from another school would have to leave their home school to have those services. And I mean, that's hard when, I mean, co-teaching is certainly, you know, one of the best practices. And in the interest of equity, I feel like if we're doing it in one school, we should be doing it in all of them.
That would be wonderful, and I would love to get there at a certain time. But right now, if you were to look at that, that's a K through 5. So that would be 6 special education teachers at each school just to manage a continuum of K-5. So we're not quite there yet, which is why we're starting small and we're starting with 1.
Michael Joseph.
So thank you for that. I think it's really helpful that and I applaud the administration and I applaud the board that we keep coming back to this. This isn't something where we had the audit last year and then every 6 months we get an update. And I think that's so important, and I think that's terrific. From a process side of things, I'd love to see this as a video, because it's so important and going out to the community. If that's something we can get to, I think it's great. I do think, though, more seriously, I think we do have to talk about, as a board, as a community, I think we have to talk about what we consider our special education philosophy when it comes to co-teaching. You're always going to have PPTs recommending specific services based on the needs of the kids, of course. That's special education. However, in other districts, in many districts, not all districts, but in many districts, the primary means of service delivery, particularly in the early grades, is co-teaching. I think we need to think about if we're starting co-teaching in one school next year, does that mean that we're having the existing resource room simultaneously in other schools? And that seems odd to me if we're thinking about what our philosophy is as far as least restrictive environment. The vast majority, if we want to try to, staffing wise, it's a similar model because instead of doing the resource room, you're doing the co-teaching. So it's something to think about as far as what we want to be the primary service delivery. If we want as students progress and need less services, that's where you can go to, a push-in model or resource from later in the day. I do wonder though if we're developing a 2-tiered system where I worry that we develop a 2-tiered system where we start a new program, co-teaching over in this school, and we have the old program in other schools, and it's not necessarily. It seems odd to me that we would have that. I think the vast majority would probably either be one or the other, and I think that's something we need to think about, and we might need to look at the staffing in regards to that. I think it's something as a board we have to think about what we want our primary philosophy to be, because if it's going to be co-teaching, then I agree we can't do co-teaching K-5 all at once. But it should be something we're considered holistically. It's not going to be every school, but it's probably going to be more than one classroom, given the number of classified kids I suspect we have in kindergarten and first grade. I don't know if that was a question, but.
I'm all for doing it at more schools, so.
Ms. Kowalski.
So how are we selecting the school that you're going to do co-teaching at next year?
So we've been looking at a variety of factors. One, because students can come from other schools. We've been looking at a centrally located school, and we've been looking at it, making sure that it's ADA accessible, looking at playground facilities, space within the room. So looking at all those factors to make a determination.
And then you've said a couple of times that other kids can come too. How does that work? Does that mean that as Laura said, are they magneted into the school? Do they come just for that purpose of co-teaching? It's unclear to me what you mean they can come from other schools. What do you mean by that?
So the PPT team for this can place a specific student at his school. So there would be a certain amount of, typically it's about 5 when you're looking at a kindergartner or first grade co-teaching students, that their PPT says that they need to be in this type of class to be able to access the general education services. So that's how the students would move from their home school to that particular school.
And we're just looking at K through 1.
For next year, yes.
I'm so excited. Sorry to speak out of turn. I think like if we could do one at like the east side of town, the west side of town, and one in the central part of town, that would be really amazing.
What is the, so the cost associated with this particular program then, since we're all trying to put it at more than one school, is the additional special ed teacher?
Correct.
So you're looking at, so if you wanted to do it at more than one school, it would be one full-time employee at each school that you wanted to do this particular program in from a K through 1.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the
Sorry.
question.
So what I'm saying is, in order to do this at more than one school, you would need one full-time employee that is a special ed teacher.
Correct. So depending on the size of the school, depends on how many staff. But if you looked at some of our schools that have maybe 2 special education teachers, in order to do that at a K through 5, you would need to add four teachers to be able to cover the 6th grades. So that's part of why we're starting small, is because the scale to try to do it everywhere would be a big leap in staffing. So we're looking at targeting one particular school right now and looking at how we can, grow with that, as well as looking at our services for, our students in other schools. So some schools are able to do co-teaching because they might have a very large cohort of students. So when you look at the amount of service hours that they have, that particular teacher can be in that classroom because they have that many students on their caseload to be able to provide that support. But again, the students that we're targeting right now are some of our students that have a more significant service need. And so so kind of going back to the cost a little bit more, these students might be students that would have to have a para with them for the majority of the day. Now they're not going to necessarily need a para or para support because they're going to be in a classroom that has the extra special education teacher. So our paras are fabulous. Do not get me wrong, but it's not the same as having a special education teacher with them for the duration of the day. And so we really are trying to look at expanding that continuum of need for students. So we have some students who can be in the general education classroom with minimal pullout, but we have other students who do require to have a special education teacher, para support provider, whoever that is, support them throughout the day. And this is another option to have with the special education teacher.
This may be a question. I have one question and a comment. The additional special ed teacher for the co-teaching, is that coming out of the ESSER 3 funds that we have slated for special ed, or is it already in our operational budget?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that question, because we are very proud of the budget that we put forward to the Board of Ed this year. And, Stacy has done a tremendous job of looking at existing staff, shuffling within. The co-teaching that we added at the high school did not add any cost to our budget. She did it by internal staff. We built in, when we came in at guidelines before bus contract, we built all of this into our existing budget at guidelines. So it's not in ESSER. This is something that we know we need going forward. We had messaged to the BET, we were probably going to need $5,600,000. And they had said, come and ask for it to implement these recommendations. And again, to just the whole team's credit, everybody worked super hard to build this into our operating because we need it going forward.
But that's a good point. We were told to sort of ask for the additional 500,000. We worked it into the budget. And frankly, that might have hurt us in the end when the transportation came in, but that's just a good point to note. Yes, Ms. Downey.
Just if, no, I just want to follow up to that great question you talk about you'd like to do it in other schools. Is there an opportunity to use, because we're talking about doing it in only one location versus multiple locations. Have we looked at whether using ESSER money to increase the number of possible locations for doing it?
We probably would not want to go in that direction in the sense that right now we had our math interventionists that were built in for this year. We had to get those to operating. We still have social workers that are sitting there that our elementary team feels like are really critical right now. If we put more in going into next year, then we've got to still figure it out in the operating. So it's going to hit the budget, anyway. So we really would like to, if going forward, trying to get things in our operating is really where it needs to be. And if it means we ask for more operating and we're transparent about why, I think that's better than not having that cliff, because otherwise we're not going to be asking for a 2 or 3%. We're going to be needing a 7% in order to keep what we implemented through ARP.
So I just had one other comment. I sent a host of questions earlier today, and my apologies, I didn't get to it soon enough. Wasn't meant to put anybody on the spot, but I do have those questions, and I think it would be helpful maybe if you and I could set up an appointment just to go through them, because I'd like to work through them, and I could monopolize this conversation for the next hour, which I don't want to do. So maybe some one-on-one, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
Ms. Hirsch.
Well, I did want to say thank you for actually addressing a lot of the questions that I had asked in your presentation. So that was great. I think hopefully will be very helpful for a lot of the parents who are interested in learning more about the Unique Learner Program. And I know you mentioned to me that, even if a student qualifies for that program, they are not required to be participatory in that Unique Learner Program if a parent would still like to have their student in the traditional classroom. So that was a nice piece, and they'll still have specials with their peers and whatnot, grade level wise. So when it comes to co-teaching, I will say, I know it's not new in this district, because I know one of my children was in a classroom with a co-teacher at one point, and it was a really wonderful experience, and it was in kindergarten, and really made a world of difference for all of the students, those with needs and those without in that classroom. Much like other members of the board, I'd love to be able to see this program expanded. And obviously that's something we can discuss, whether it's looking into it at some point through this first year or beyond. Do you have an idea of how many students we would have coming into the system next year in the kindergarten and first grade area that would qualify for a classroom as such? And if so, would it be more than one classroom's worth?
Right now, we do have so we kind of look at 5 students being the cap, because we don't want it to become, we're a true co-teaching model. It wouldn't be a 50-50. So we're kind of looking at, that quarter-ish. And so when we review IEPs and we look at the incoming preschoolers, we do have enough that would meet the, the kind of the guidelines for, the co-teaching program. It is optional for parents. So, as mentioned before, there's some parents that might not want to leave their homeschool, and that's okay. And that's why we also have an inclusion specialist who can support our, students in the other schools. So again, trying to provide options for students, for families. But I can say that following February, I think, when we spoke, I had several parents reach out and set up appointments with me and met with me, showing, expressing their interest in wanting to be part of these programs, both the co-teaching and the unique learner. So there is interest, and knowing that it might not be at their home school, because there's only a 1 in 11 chance without that being announced. So, parents are very open to that. I think that often, again, it's trying to develop that not one size does not fit all. And while we individualize the resource model, that's not always the model that some of our students need. And so being able to offer something else has been really important to parents, and especially those. I heard from many elementary parents about the transition from preschool to kindergarten and that need for a higher level of service. And so again, that's not for all students. Many of the preschoolers will be able to go into their kindergarten class and they'll be great. And, being able to have resource pull out a couple times a week is exactly what they need. But then for some others who have more significant needs, having the option of having that special ed teacher in the classroom all day is really going to benefit them and help them grow and learn, and move at that quicker pace that we're hoping to support them with.
Yeah, I know that you had mentioned to me when we were briefly discussing this, that the reason to look at K1 as opposed to 4-5 and the transition going forward is to ensure that positive transition from preschool to elementary, and to give those students that might have a few extra needs coming in, more of an opportunity to leap forward and then become more successful in the general education classroom without needing as much pull-out support once they hit first grade, second grade, third grade, and going forward. So I think that's fantastic. But I know this is again in support of the other questions, is have you considered surveying? I know you said parents have reached out to you. Any of the incoming, any of the students that are in our preschool program, just seeing who would be interested, to see how much interest there would be for us to sort of look at, would we want to add another program, even if it's not the first year, just to have an idea.
So I haven't sent out a survey to the current preschool. Trying to go through the process the correct way and the budget and bringing it to the board. And, it's trying not to get too in front of the other. So we know from the audit that, we needed to expand our continuum. I knew from the beginning of my tenure here in talking with parents, they've shared the concerns, and then following the February meeting, parents reaching out. So I've heard the concerns and they've reached out, but I haven't done that, only because I kind of felt that was putting the cart before the horse. So trying to be respectful of process, but that's absolutely something that we could do.
It was just a question that had been asked of me, and so I wanted to put that forward. And certainly, we don't want to make promises that we can't keep. This will be something that's new. I think it's renewed in our district, and I think it's going to be incredible. I can't wait to hear more about it. So thank you for sharing the details, at least from my perspective tonight. I think a lot of parents will be reaching out to you with some additional questions, and because these programs are sounding great.
Thank you.
Ms. Cost.
I just hope that, the BAT listens, because this is how, you eliminate the need for students to go out of district, is making sure the supports are there in the classroom, and so that they don't have to seek this kind of classroom environment elsewhere.
Thank you.
It's a good way to end, Ms. Costin, with the plug. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. H. Moving on to action items. The first one is GHS vestibule ed specs, Ms. Downey.
Okay, I'm going to start with the motion, just because we have to have a motion on the record. I'm going to make a motion that the board approve the educational specifications for the Greenwich High School entryway project dated March 27th, 2020, as revised March 15th, 2022.
I'm happy to second it. That's fine. Go ahead.
You have your second. And so before you all, I sent an email to the board saying that we have a revised set of educational specifications for the Greenwich High School entryway project, the only change of which is the addition of on item number 11, which came about because planning and zoning in the process of approving the project put certain conditions on the project. So as we move ahead with applying for state reimbursement, our educational specifications have to align with our P&Z approval and the plans that we're going to have to approve in 2 weeks. So, which is why we have to vote on this revision tonight. We're going to need to do certified minutes of this minutes of the meeting. And then we're going to ultimately, we had hoped to have the full construction documents and budget for tonight, but because of basically having to add in a substantial amount of landscaping work, the architects have had to undertake that process, needed as much time as possible to get it done, so that the plan would be the building committee will vote on the construction drawings, which include the landscaping and the budget, on April 6th. It would come before us on April 7th, and then meet with the state the following week to hopefully get approvals, with the goal of going out to bid end of April, beginning of May, which still keeps us on a timetable to get the shovel in the ground this summer if we have a contractor who can do it. Because obviously the project won't get done over the summer, but the really messy work of the digging is the goal, to be least disruptive to the campus and the school. So if that part, the foundational work, can get done over the summer, there's already been discussions about how we're going to do this project over the course of the school year. So that's kind of the down and dirty on the high school entryway. So happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Kelly.
In order to get our funding, we have to follow your motion exactly as it is. We have to do exactly what we're doing here.
Precise wording.
Any discussion we have, I guess we can have offline to save time. I know you had asked a question, Karen, but I was going to call the question because there's nothing we could do about what you're putting forward.
The motion, yes, correct, but we can have discussion before we vote on the motion. It's perfectly acceptable.
Ms. Hirsch.
Oh, I just had one quick question. I know you mentioned that we have to add some greenery, which is lovely and wonderful. I just didn't know if making this change affects the budget or the timeline. It sounds like it's not going to affect the timeline much.
Well,
I
it's
don't know
delayed the
about budget.
timeline that we would have been further ahead right now. We would have already voted on it. And then there's this whole process where, the RTM had to vote on revised resolutions at their meeting also last week. Learning a bit about the state reimbursement process, there are a lot of hoops to jump through, and things have to be done with great precision, as Joe just pointed out. And then there's also these timing windows. So we're a little behind where I think we all wanted to be, but the Architectural Review Committee took a number of meetings with the committee. So we're still hopeful that we can get it going this summer. In terms of cost, the proposed, or what's going to be proposed for landscaping, I think we're going to have some budgetary challenges. I'm not going to lie. So when we all see it in 2 weeks, they gave us a preliminary budget, what they put in there for landscaping. We're concerned it's not going to be realistic, but the committee has been meeting once a week, basically, to keep working on this. So it's been, everybody's been very diligent in doing as much as they possibly can. But for example, there's additional architectural costs because that was not within the original scope of the project, right? All these layers. So there's the architectural work as well as the plantings. So it's going to be an interesting challenge of the budget, but we're doing our best. And we're hopeful that there'll be, in terms of the landscaping, that there's a lot of discussion about looking to outside groups, Tree Conservancy, maybe the high school PTA, to find additional funds to help with the landscape, the neighbors with the landscaping work.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you for all your work. I know how much work it is, and you're doing a ton of it, so thank you for that. And now I think it's appropriate for me to say I call the question.
Agreed. All in favor? Mr. Kittle?
Yep.
Thank you. All right, that passes 8-0. Next up, financial and staffing report, Mr. O'Keefe.
Good evening. So as of the end of the month of February, our year-to-date actuals comes in at $100.5 million, which is about 58% of the budget of our full year budget of 172. Compared to the same time last year, our spending is up about 4 million year to year, or about 4.1%. Of that 4 million, the drivers are salaries, which is 1.9 of the 4. Salaries are up 2.3%. Supplies, I've mentioned this in the previous few months. Supplies are up. It's really just a year-to-year phenomenon. It's up 1.5 million, or 64%, due to the residual impact of the reduced level of spending in the first half of last year, which was the result of the pre-spend from the prior year. SPED tuition and settlements, although flat year to year in the actuals, when you take into consideration the encumbrances and pending cases, as I've said in the prior month, we're looking like we're going to come in at about 8.6 million when it all adds up, which is 1.3 million over the budgeted level of 8.3. As mentioned last month, we're already working on identifying savings to offset. To date, we have about half of that already identified as to how we're going to cover that, and we're working every day, and we believe we have enough opportunities to contain this exposure. So we feel pretty good about it. On capital, overall capital available balances as of the end of February, $25.2 million, which is down another $2 million from the January financial report. Month to month, the good news is the bulk of the 2 million was in pre-22 projects, which is, what our focus has been for the last year and a half, to concentrate on the older projects and close them out. So out of the 2 million reduction in our available capital, 1.7 was in older projects, and current projects also came down by about 300,000. Since September of 20, when we really put a focus on closing out the old projects, these pre-22 projects have been reduced by almost 19 million, or about 65%. So 2/3 have come down. Also included in the pre-22 balances are 4 building committee projects: New Lab, Glenville, Mesa, and Hamilton Avenue. And they right now still have an available balance of 2.5 million, so that when the state finally closes them out, we'll be able to return that $2.5 million. And that will also generate some payments from the state as well. On school lunch, continuing to see a very low level of cash sales versus budget due to the free meals for all mandate, and that's in place officially till the end of 21-22, but I'm hearing that that they could extend that past June 30th. So we'll wait to hear on that from the state. State reimbursements have been very high, very strong, due to very high participation levels. So as a result, we now believe that we'll have enough reimbursements to offset the underrun in cash sales. And so we have a shot at actually being, at or slightly above budget when it comes to total revenue for the year. Expenses are projected to be slightly over budget, but we believe we have some summer salary that we could rationalize to charge to the ARP. So if we move the small amount of summer salaries, we could close our school lunch expenses on or close to budget. So if all goes well, we're looking at a number that could be at break even or slightly better if everything falls into place. So this would be a huge accomplishment. Let's see. So I mentioned already the sped tuition. There's a chart in the back of the package that breaks out the 8.6 million. So that chart is essentially unchanged from last month. There's also charts in there for ESSER 2 and ARP. A quick summary of ESSER 2. So a recap on ESSER 2 with $4.2 million, actually 3. And right now what's in there, and we will be reviewing this with the BET Budget Committee in April. People cost 2.6 out of the 4.3, technology, $1 million, facility supplies, 200K, classroom supplies, 200K, and food services, transportation, another 200K. So that makes up the ESSER 2 that will be reviewed with the BET Budget Committee in April. ARP, or our budget, is 9.6. People costs make up about 4.5 of it. Benefits another 700,000 or so. HVAC projects another 700,000. Other facilities related expenses 2.2. Food transportation about 200,000, and teaching and learning expenses 1.3. So that makes up the 9.6. I will indicate that we're still moving. We were notified that we were going to have to put in some benefit dollars for full year 22, which was that was new news to us. So we already have benefit dollars in there for 23 and 24, but so what's in here now is not yet updated. We'll be updating that benefit number in the next day or two, and so it'll be, bottom line, it'll be the same, but it'll be slightly changed from what you see in this package. And that's it. Any questions?
Ms. Kowalski.
Sean, I think you said something to the effect of, I wrote it down in my notes. Oh, that we were going to move some of our salaries to ARP. How do we do that?
We are currently incurring salaries this year in full year 22, and plan to incur salaries in full year 23, 24. For now, for full year 22, we are charging salaries to a placeholder account that was given to us to use by the town. And once we go to the BET Budget Committee, BET, and ultimately the RTM for ARP, they will then set up an actual grant account, just like any other grant, and we will move the expenses out of that placeholder account in our operating over to the grant account.
So these are salaries that we are over budget on, or salaries that we're in our funding, and so this is just moving money around? Okay.
These are salaries that are temporarily placeholdered in our operating fund, but will be transferred to the grant account once the appropriation is made by the BET.
Got it. Okay. So I know that we sat down and had I had gone through a bunch of questions with you all about a week or so ago, and I'm wondering if there is a way to gather some more transparency around, the ESSER particular. I think it's ESSER 3 spending, because ESSER 2 is going to be spent this year and next. But one is to understand, I guess, if there's a way to show us from a standpoint of the community feedback that was received on how to spend ESSER funding, one, what we did with that feedback and how that's reflected in our decisioning process here as to how it's being allocated. I think it would also be helpful to understand what is already been spent or encumbered for purposes of understanding this particular budget, because I can appreciate and I believe that some of this, based upon our discussions, is flowing in nature. For example, we may not be spending almost $750,000 on PPE next year. And the question will be, well, what happens with that $3.25 million, and who's going to make the decision as to what it's spent on? I think there's been some concern generally vocalized in the community that there hasn't been as much oversight as to where and how this money is being spent. And I'd like to understand, one, based upon what's already been spent versus encumbered, but what is the process going to be going forward when money is not spent on particular items because, for example, we don't need to spend $60,000 on disinfectant, we're deciding to spend it on something else. Who makes that decision? When will it come to the board, and how will that be decided? So I think we need to have some greater clarity and visibility into this particular, all of this breakdown. I think it would also be helpful to understand where we're intending to place the staffing resources. And particularly, I know that some of these spending, whether it's a climate consultant or the FACE consultant, are only being applied to certain schools and not all of the schools. And I think it'd be helpful to understand and give transparency to the community as to what schools are getting those resources versus others.
Is that question to Sean, or I don't know, Christina, you've been talking a lot about this at the budget committee, so.
I think what Karen's really getting at, to be honest, because it is free flowing, is that perhaps as we get these reports, we get a highlight of things that are changing, right? Because we can keep because that's, you want to be able to see what's different. Am I kind of cutting it down to like, right, like you say, like the PPE, I'm just gonna use that as an example. Like if we don't need to spend that money can be allocated in a different way. And so in order to highlight it for the board, maybe we just need to have some sort of color coding or something that draws our attention to it so that we understand it. I think that's what we were just.
That's one level of it, but the second level of it is, so if we're not going to spend $730,000 next year on PPE, which is what's currently allocated, who's making the decision as where's that spent? Is that coming to the board to say, here are options on what we could spend it on and making a decision? Or how are we going to know how we're going to choose to spend almost $1 million?
Well, I think wouldn't Dr. Jones come to the budget committee for a discussion about it? I mean, kind of the way we did it initially. No, am I right or wrong?
You are correct, but I will say, and Sean mentioned it earlier, when this comes to you next month, you're going to see there's no longer 726,000
Right.
there. Because this is the work that we were in a meeting today about this very issue. Because once we had to put the benefits back in 22, you have to look and find what is still movable that you can actually utilize. Like if you look at the human resources, those people are working for us now. And I will say, just to add one more layer to ARP, is that, you know, a few weeks ago, they did let us know the U.S. Department of Education has a huge review process they're making us go through. We will have 1 month from the middle of May to the middle of June to complete that. And they want to know not only where we're spending the money, are we spending it on Title I? They want to know the demographics. It's going to be a tremendous reporting level. So I'm really proud of where we're spending our dollars, because when you look at what they're asking us, that's why they're asking our schools spending it in the way that they're supposed to be. We're a little nervous about a 1 month timeline, and they say that if we don't have it done on time, there are no extensions. So, and you run the risk of not only us losing federal dollars, but the state of Connecticut. So,
well, I mean, and
we'll continue to make this as finite as we can, I guess is what I'm saying. We'll see, see if we can get another layer of detail on here.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, for example, because I think after our conversation that we had in discussion as to where certain things would be going to, for example, only certain schools are getting, the opportunity of a face consultant and other supplies, and we have in here supplies, which we didn't know what that $3,000 is going to. So I think we just need to be a little clearer in what this is and where it's going to. I think that the state report or the federal report will be helpful because I think that's the kind of level of transparency that we're looking for and understanding, because obviously certain things you've said are going to be fluid. And the question is, how is that going to be decided? And I realize that it came to the budget committee, and maybe it did, but it didn't come to the rest of the board. And I think it would either be helpful to either, one, have a report out as to where that spending is going and what the budget committee has decided to bring to the board for a vote, or it should show up in the minutes. But it's been less than transparent to the rest of the board as to how this came about. And if you go back and read the minutes, and it's no fault of the budget committee, it's not there. I've read the minutes. It's not discussed in any kind of detail as to how this came about. And now this continues to be a little bit of a moving target. And unless you sit on the phone for an hour, which I utilized 3 administrators for over an hour to ask questions, and I still have others, I'm not getting the answers. So we just need to start from the very beginning going forward now. I realize it's not the beginning, but we need more information.
I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, but Ms. Hirsch?
I mean, I understand where Karen's coming from and asking for some of that transparency, but because we're not part of the budget committee, but I will say I'm pleased to see that it is part of our monthly financial updates, and we're getting asked some of those questions at least here, and seeing where the funding is going and if it's changing, from one bucket to another. So I do appreciate that. I just wanted to thank you for making sure.
I would beg to differ. I think we've been extremely transparent from day one when we got these grants. We've been including them in monthly reports. And as far as deeper detail, we have invoice level detail for every one of these expenses.
That's your prerogative. It's hard for me to, I spend a lot of time in finance. Once I get to $7,600 on an Excel spreadsheet, I'm that's pretty good for me. But I guess I've run some pretty big situations. So any other comments, Michael Joseph?
Yeah. So I understand the conversation here, and not being the finance guy, I do think I do appreciate this, and I think this is helpful. I agree with Karen. I think, Ms. Kowalski. I think that as this changes, if there is a helpful way to identify that month to month, so we don't have to go back and forth from different things. For example, we talked about PPE. My assumption, and that was the question I had, my assumption that the 3.3 ALP teachers in that we have in ESSER 3, my assumption is that line was going to change next year too, because that was based on wasn't that based on the smaller sections this year? Is that what it was?
No, ALP is actually based on having more of a super block, and this is something we're actually still working through with GEA right now on this issue. When we went into COVID, it allowed students to be in a super block so that you didn't have as much back and forth. It wasn't necessarily lower numbers, but what we also understood coming out of COVID is that, like, our students in ALP used to just miss most of their writing in class. We've known about it for years. We never adjusted the schedules. What this is allowing us to do is actually teach everything that they should be taught in their ALP classroom. So it may not go away, but again, that's something that we're discussing with GEA right now. Yeah.
So thank you for clarifying that. I do think that's where, right, ESSER is different because the board it's not part of the budget we approve. The board consults so I think that's an example of where there's opportunities might be more opportunity for board discussion, because I personally, I think I have a philosophical issue with that, in that ESSER is for learning loss and other COVID issues. The ALP program doesn't strike me as philosophically aligned with that when we're dealing with the significant learning loss in the community. And I know ALP is also the third rail of BOE politics, so I'm not going to criticize the ALP program extensively. But if ESSER's about learning loss, spending $750,000 on gifted students is a different
I'm
priority.
sorry, I feel like I have to counter that.
Yeah.
But how about if those gifted students did have learning loss? That's also important.
That
So
should be, that's a role for the instructional core, not for.
Advanced, not.
So-
And I don't think it was
so wait,
solely
so
about
I-
learning loss.
So let me point out, my ultimate point, because that's, you're
because
actually
you just hit the third
supporting me.
rail, right?
Well, not the third rail. My ultimate point there on that is that's where I think further board discussion on some of these issues, if we make these decisions, is necessary, because we didn't have a conversation about that as a board. And I understand that because of the nature of ESSER, but
You
I
also
think,
weren't on the board when we started it.
but we didn't talk about it. I was at the board meeting.
No, we actually did talk about the
it.
super block. Actually, we did. Because
As a
I
full
was,
board.
yes, because I was I experienced it. I
But
was a
now we're
huge believer.
talking about,
Yeah.
now we're talking about fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24, and this board has not talked about it. And I think that's Karen Kowalski's ultimate point, is that we need that level of, we need to consider a vehicle for board consultation on ESSER spending in subsequent fiscal years.
Mr. Kelly?
Transparency is always better, no matter how you look at it, no matter how defined and detailed you want to get. If the desire of the board members, though, to have greater transparency, we have to figure out a way of providing that transparency. We have to do that. But on the flip side of that, we also have to understand these are unique times, unique funds, and unique spending. And sometimes it's better decided boots on the ground for some of this, but also as we monitor it. So it's in a normal budget, you can do a 5-year, 10-year study of the delta between 2010 versus 2015. And you could just say there's an inconsistency for whatever reason, do some mathematical calculations, you just notice a difference. You can use your business acclimate and figure that stuff out. We can do that. But it's so unique times, things are moving so quickly. We have to be a little more tolerant, but also transparent.
All right, seeing no other hands, I call the question. All in favor of the financial report? Anyone
Hey,
else?
Kathleen,
Okay.
no
sorry.
one ever actually made a motion.
We didn't? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. A motion to authorize a financial report for period ended February 28, 2022. Sorry, can I have someone second that? Ms. Downey? Okay, all in favor of the financial report? Okay, that passes 7-1. Thanks so much. Yeah, Cody voted. Thank you, Cody. Okay. All right, so now we move to agenda planning. And on here, I should note, I guess we don't have to add it to this particular because it's happening so fast, but we of course have a meeting next week, professional development at Havemeyer.
At what time?
It starts at 6 p.m. And then on April 7th, thanks to Ms. Downey, we have a GHS entryway, and Karen Kowalski wisely said, maybe let's have this on Zoom, which I think would be a nice thing.
If everyone's comfortable with the plans and the drawings all being on Zoom and submit, if that's fine, and the architect and the chair of the building. No, it's fine. I just want everybody to be happy.
That's correct. Now, however, I feel like during this meeting, we talked about potentially adding, engaging on as a board on such a middle school at that time. If that's possible, we can still do that on Zoom. Could we move that to April 7th as well? Do you think that's possible? Yeah, I just checked. Okay, so if that's the case, let's add that to the agenda on April 7th.
And
'cause
what
otherwise-
time? Are we gonna do 6 or 7?
Oh, do you guys have a view? 7, okay, I'm hearing 7. Okay, so 7 for April 7th, and that maybe we'll add Central Middle School. And then we're on break, which we've kept. And then we go to April 28th. Anything else? Yes, Michael Joseph.
Yeah, I keep bringing it up. We've talked about an executive session to go back to review the high school security plans based on the incident in the fall. I don't want us to lose sight of that.
Thank you. Yes, I know Dr. Jones has followed up with Mr. Heavey. Sorry, Chief Heavey. I can't believe I just said it a couple times. I know he's very busy dealing with some COVID. And Tom Bavkowski's out. But thank you. Believe me, I keep bugging them on that. That's fine too. Yeah, we might have to pivot. So it's a good idea. Anything else? Okay. Can I get a motion?
And
Sorry,
we still have,
Ms.
we
Downing.
still have the, one more thing, transfers.
It's a written report though. We don't need to do anything.
Okay, just check.
Yeah. All right. So
I'll make a motion to, wait,
it's not your job.
okay, sorry.
It's your job.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Who would like to second that? That's Joe's second job. All right. All in favor? That passes. Karen, are you with us? Yeah. Okay. That passes 8-0. Thanks so much. Good night.